I'm recording this from a hostel in Prague. It's 3:47 a.m., and in 13 minutes, they're going to realize I'm not where I'm supposed to be. My name is Emma Walsh. 2 months ago, I was selected for Blackwood University's prestigious European Cultural Immersion program. 42 students, 12 cities, 1 semester that would change our lives forever. They told us it was competitive. They told us it was exclusive. They told us we were lucky. They didn't tell us about the list. They didn't tell us that in every city, one student's name appears on a door that shouldn't exist, and when it does, that student never makes it to the next city. They didn't tell us because the students who discover the truth, well, we're not supposed to be able to tell anyone. But I found a way out. And before they find me, before they make me forget like the others, I need you to know what really happens in Blackwood's Study Abroad program. Because next year, it could be you.
Welcome, travelers of the dark, to After Dark Horrors. If you're new to this channel, consider this your invitation to the stories that universities bury in their archives, that tour companies delete from their records, that students whisper about in dorm rooms but never dare report. I'm your guide through the shadows that follow students across continents, through the bureaucratic nightmares that hide supernatural truths, through the warnings that come too late. Tonight's account comes from Emma Walsh, a junior at Blackwood University, who contacted me 6 weeks ago from an internet cafe in Prague. She sent me 47 hours of audio recordings, 312 photographs, and a collection of documents that Blackwood University claims don't exist. Before we begin Emma's testimony, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Not for the algorithm, but for your own protection. Because stories like Emma's, stories about programs that still operate, that still recruit, these are the warnings we all need to hear. And if you're currently considering a study abroad program, especially one that seems too good to be true, leave a like on this video. It helps other students find these warnings before they sign contracts they don't fully understand. Now, dim your lights, check your passport expiration date, and prepare yourself for a journey across Europe that no travel blog will ever document. Because some programs don't just broaden your horizons, they trap you beyond them. I should start at the beginning, back when this was still a dream come true instead of a nightmare I'm trying to wake up from. It was February 2024 when the announcement went up on Blackwood University's Study Abroad bulletin board, not the digital one, the physical board in Haver. Hall that nobody really checks anymore except desperate seniors looking for last-minute credit. Opportunities, the flyer was different from the usual glossy brochures. It was printed on this cream-colored paper that felt old, like parchment almost, with elegant black lettering that looked hand-calligraphed. The Blackwood European Cultural Immersion Program established 1887. Knowledge transcends borders, but some borders transcend knowledge. 12 cities, 14 weeks, 42 students, full scholarship. All expenses paid, application by invitation only. At the bottom, in smaller text, it said, if you're reading this, you've already been selected for consideration. I took a photo of it with my phone. But when I looked at the image later, the text was different. It just showed a normal study abroad advertisement for a program in London. I went back to check the board the next day, and the flyer was gone. In its place was a small envelope with my name, written on it in the same elegant script. Inside was an invitation to an information session that night at 11 p.m. in the Blackwood archive room, a part of the library I didn't even know existed. I should have questioned it. An 11 p.m. meeting? An archive room I'd never heard of? But Blackwood University had always been different. It was one of those small, prestigious colleges in New England that nobody's really heard of unless they're in certain circles. The kind of place where secret societies still mean something, and tradition trumps common sense. The archive room was in the basement of the library, behind a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only," but when I arrived at 10:55 p.m., the door was propped open with an old leather-bound book. Inside, 30 or so students sat in high-backed chairs arranged in a perfect circle. I recognized some of them, mostly honor students, a few scholarship kids like me, some international students. We all had that same confused but intrigued expression. At exactly 11 p.m., a woman entered the room. Professor Regina Blackwood, yes, that Blackwood, descended from the university's founder. She taught European history and was notorious for never giving anyone above a B+. She wore a black traveling cloak that should have looked ridiculous, but somehow made perfect sense in that room. "You're all here because you've been selected," she began without preamble. Not by me, not by the university, but by the program itself. The Blackwood European Cultural Immersion Program has been running continuously since 1887, taking selected students through 12 cities over 14 weeks. Prague, Vienna, Budapest, KRAKOW, Munich, Zurich, Milan, Florence, Barcelona, Paris, Amsterdam, and London. She paused, her gray eyes scanning each of us. This is not a normal study abroad program. You won't attend classes. You won't write papers. You won't earn credits in the traditional sense. What you will do is immerse yourself completely in the cultural unconscious of each city. You will stay in historical buildings that don't appear on booking websites. You will have access to archives and collections that scholars would kill to see. You will experience Europe not as tourists, not even as students, but as temporary inheritors of centuries of hidden knowledge. A student I didn't recognize raised his hand. What's the catch? This sounds too good to be true. Professor Blackwood smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. The catch, Mr. Peterson, is that not everyone completes the program. The immersion is total. The experience is intense. Some students find it overwhelming. They choose to return home early. This is perfectly acceptable, though they forfeit any future opportunities with the program. How many drop out? Another student asked. On average, we lose one student per city, she replied casually. They realize the program isn't for them and return home. We started with 60 applications, selected 42 for interviews, and will take 30. By the end, we typically graduate between 15 and 18 students. That should have been my first red flag, a 50% dropout rate. But the way she phrased it made it sound like personal choice, like weakness on the part of those who left. She continued explaining the program. We would leave in exactly 4 weeks. Everything would be paid for: flights, accommodation, meals, even a generous stipend for personal expenses. We would each receive a leather-bound journal to document our experiences and a special phone with international coverage to stay in contact with the program coordinators. The selection process is simple, Professor Blackwood said. Over the next 4 weeks, you'll receive 3 tests. They won't be announced. They won't be obvious. You might not even realize you're being tested. Those who pass all 3 will receive their acceptance letter and plane tickets. Those who fail, well, you'll forget this meeting ever happened. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. Oh, and one more thing. From this moment forward, you are not to discuss this program with anyone outside this room. Not your parents, not your friends, not your academic advisors. This is the first test. Break this rule, and you'll wake up tomorrow with no memory of tonight and a sudden urge to change your major to something practical. The door closed behind her with a sound like a tomb. Sealing. We all sat there for a moment in silence. Then slowly people started leaving. Some exchanged numbers, others hurried out without making eye contact. I was one of the last to leave, partly because I was trying to process what had just happened, and partly because I was studying the room itself. The walls were covered in old photographs, groups of students in various European cities, dating back over a century, but something was off about them. In each photo, there was a blurred spot, like someone had been erased, or like one person was moving too fast for the camera to capture. And in every photo, regardless of the year or the city, there was the same building in the background, a narrow townhouse with a red door and the number 7 above it. I took photos of everything with my phone. Like the flyer, they all came out wrong. The photographs showed empty walls. The room itself appeared as a normal study room when viewed through the camera lens. The first test came 3 days later. I was in my Victorian literature class when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your grandmother is in the hospital. Come immediately." My grandmother had been dead for 3 years. I stared at the text, my heart racing. Then I noticed something. The phone that had buzzed wasn't my regular phone. It was a different one, hidden in my bag. An old-style flip phone I'd never seen before. The text was the only message on it. I looked around the classroom. 2 other students, both from the archive room meeting, were staring at similar phones with confused expressions. One of them, a girl named Jessica, stood up abruptly and left the room, mumbling an excuse to the professor. That's when I understood. This was the test. They were seeing who would panic, who would leave, who would break. I stayed in my seat. I finished the class. I didn't respond to the text. That night, Jessica wasn't at the dining hall. When I asked around, people looked confused. "Jessica who?" They'd say. Her roommate claimed she'd never had a roommate. It was as if she'd never existed at all. 29 students remained. The second test came a week later. We all received emails from the university stating that there had been an error in our financial aid and we each owed $15,000 immediately or we'd be expelled. The emails looked official, came from legitimate university addresses, and included specific details about our financial aid packages. 5 students went to the financial aid office to complain. They never came back to the program. One of them, Marcus, was my lab partner in chemistry. The next day he showed up to class as usual, but when I mentioned the archive room, he looked at me like I was insane. "What archive room?" he asked, genuinely confused. 24 students remained. The third test was the worst. We each received a visit from someone we trusted, a parent, a sibling, a best friend, who tried to convince us not to go on the trip. They had legitimate concerns, real reasons why we shouldn't go. My visitor was my older sister, Sarah. She showed up at my dorm room unexpectedly, crying, begging me not to go to Europe. "I had a dream," she said. "You went to Europe and you never came back. Please, Emma, please don't go. I'll pay for you to go anywhere else, do anything else, just not this program." The thing is, it really was my sister. I could tell by the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous, the way she called me M-Bear, like when we were kids. This wasn't an illusion or an actor. Somehow, the program had made her genuinely believe I was in danger. I had to choose between the program and my sister's peace of mind. I told her I wouldn't go. I lied to her face and watched her leave, relieved. 6 students couldn't do it. They broke down and either confessed to their visitors about the program, failing the first test retroactively, or genuinely agreed not to go. 18 students remained, but then something strange happened. Professor Blackwood called us back to the archive room. "Congratulations," she said, but she looked troubled. "You've all passed the tests. However, we have an unusual situation this year. We need exactly 30 students. No more, no less. The program requires this number for logistical reasons." She explained that 12 additional students from previous years who had dropped out early had requested to rejoin and complete the program. They had been granted permission, bringing our total to 30. "These returning students will serve as your mentors," she said. They know what to expect. Listen to them. Learn from them. They chose to come back for a reason. The returning students filed in, and my blood went cold. They looked different, older despite only being gone a year or two. Their eyes had this hollow quality, like they'd seen too much. They moved in sync, like they'd rehearsed it. And when they smiled, it was the kind of smile you give when you're trying to convince someone everything is fine when it absolutely isn't. One of them, a guy named David, who'd apparently left the program 2 years ago in Budapest, stood to speak. "We're here to help you complete what we couldn't," he said, his voice monotone. "The program is challenging, but the rewards are beyond imagination. You'll understand things about the world that most people never will. You'll see the true Europe, the one hidden beneath the tourist veneer. And most importantly, you'll become part of something that's been continuing for over a century." "Why did you leave?" I asked. His smile faltered for just a second. "I wasn't ready then. I didn't understand the honor being offered. I do now." "What changed your mind?" another student asked. "The program never really lets you go," David replied. "Even after you leave, you dream about the cities you didn't see. You feel incomplete. The knowledge you gained in the cities you did visit, it demands completion. It's like reading half a book or hearing half a song. The incompleteness drives you mad." Professor Blackwood nodded approvingly. "The program creates a bond. Once you begin, you're part of it forever, whether you complete it or not. These 12 have chosen to embrace that bond fully." She handed out packets containing our itineraries, plane tickets and program phones, sleek smartphones with an app I'd never seen before, something called Wanderer. The icon was a red door with the number 7 on it. "You leave in 1 week," she said. "Pack light, no more than 1 suitcase and 1 carry-on. Bring comfortable walking shoes, a raincoat, and the journal you'll be provided. Everything else will be supplied." She paused at the door again, just like the first night. "Oh, and remember, 1 student per city, on average, discovers the program isn't for them. This is natural, expected even. Don't try to convince anyone to stay who wants to leave. The program knows who belongs and who doesn't." The week passed in a blur. I couldn't concentrate on my classes. I kept having dreams about that red door with the number 7. My sister called every day, relieved I'd chosen not to go, and I had to keep lying to her. The returning students started a group chat on the Wanderer app, sharing tips that made no sense. Never look directly at the door when you first see it. If someone offers you a brass key, politely decline. The 3rd basement is off limits, no matter what you hear down there. If you see yourself in a photograph you didn't pose for, don't acknowledge it. The night tours are mandatory. The morning tours don't exist. Finally, departure day arrived. March 15th, 2024. The Ides of March, though I didn't think about that significance until later. We met at Boston Logan Airport at 5 a.m. All 30 of us, plus Professor Blackwood and 2 teaching assistants I'd never seen before, a tall, thin man introduced only as Mr. Gray and a woman who never gave her name at all. She just smiled when asked and said, "I'm whoever you need me to be." Our flight was to Prague, with a layover in Reykjavik. The tickets were first class, which should have been exciting, but something was off about them. The airline was listed as Memoria Airways, which I'd never heard of. When I Googled it, nothing came up. But when we got to the check-in counter, they were expecting us. They had a whole section of the plane reserved just for our group. The plane itself was strange. It looked modern from the outside, but inside it was decorated like something from the 1920s. Art Deco patterns, brass fixtures, seats upholstered in deep burgundy velvet. The safety video was in black and white, and the flight attendants wore vintage uniforms that looked like they belonged in a museum. "This is a charter flight," Professor Blackwood explained when she saw our confused faces. "The program has an arrangement with certain airlines. You'll find we have many such arrangements throughout Europe. The flight was smooth until we hit the halfway point over the Atlantic. Then the captain made an announcement. Ladies and gentlemen of the Blackwood program, we're now entering historical airspace. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and your minds are open. We'll be traveling not just through space, but through layers of time. You may experience temporal displacement, déjà vu, or memories that aren't your own. This is normal. Welcome to the true journey. The lights in the cabin flickered and changed color, from the normal white to a gaslight amber. Outside the windows, the clouds looked different, older somehow, like we were seeing them through a sepia filter. Several students started looking nauseous, not from motion sickness, but from something else, something harder to define. The girl sitting next to me, Amy, grabbed my hand. "Do you feel that?" She whispered. "I did." It was like the plane was moving in more directions than it should be able to. Not just forward, but sideways through something that wasn't quite space. The returning students seemed unaffected. David was actually smiling, his eyes closed like he was enjoying familiar music. "This is the easy part," he said to no one in particular. "Wait until we land." The layover in Reykjavik was when things got truly strange. We didn't go through the regular terminal. Instead, we were directed to a part of the airport that looked abandoned, with signs in languages I didn't recognize. Not Icelandic, not anything modern. The waiting area was a round room with no windows and 12 doors, each leading to a different gate. One door for each city, Mr. Gray explained. Though we'll only be using the Prague door today. But we're in Reykjavik, someone pointed out. "We're taking a connecting flight to Prague." Mr. Gray smiled, the first expression I'd seen from him. "Are we? Check your tickets again." We did. The tickets now showed a direct flight from Boston to Prague, no layover mentioned. But we were clearly in Reykjavik, weren't we? The program operates on multiple itineraries simultaneously, Professor Blackwood explained, though her explanation only made things more confusing. The official itinerary that exists in university records, your parents' understanding of where you are, and the actual journey you're taking. They align at certain points, the cities themselves, but the spaces between are flexible. We waited in that round room for what felt like hours, but according to my phone was only minutes. Other people occasionally passed through, or at least I thought they were people. They were dressed in period clothing from different eras, and they all had that same hollow-eyed look as the returning students. Some of them waved at Professor Blackwood like they knew her, even though some of them looked like they'd stepped out of a photograph from the 1940s. Finally, a door opened, not the Prague door, but one that hadn't been there before. Doctor number 7, and we were told to board. This time, there was no plane, just a long corridor that smelled like old books and coal smoke. We walked for what felt like miles, our footsteps echoing strangely, until suddenly we emerged into bright sunlight. We were standing in Wenceslas Square in Prague. But how? Amy was hyperventilating. We were just in an airport. We were just in Iceland. How are we in Prague? The first lesson of the program, Professor Blackwood said calmly, is that geography is more fluid than you've been taught. Cities aren't just physical locations. They're ideas, consciousnesses, living things that exist partially outside normal space. The program has agreements with these consciousnesses. We're allowed to move between them in ways others cannot. She led us through the square toward a series of townhouses that looked exactly like the one in all those old photographs, narrow. Buildings with red doors and the number 7 above them. Except there were 12 of them, side by side, identical. Each city has its own number 7, she explained. They're all the same building, just different aspects of it. You'll be staying here for the week. Choose your roommates wisely. You'll be sharing with the same people in every city. I ended up rooming with Amy and a returning student named Claire, who hadn't spoken a single word since Boston. Our room was on the 3rd floor, impossibly, since the building only looked tall enough for 2 floors from the outside. The room itself was beautiful, but anachronistic, decorated in a style that seemed to shift between Art Nouveau and modern minimalism, depending on the angle you looked at it. That first night in Prague, I couldn't sleep. The city sounds outside our window were wrong, horses' hooves on cobblestones when I knew the street was modern and paved. Vendors calling in Czech but also in German, in languages that hadn't been spoken here for centuries. When I looked out the window, the city kept changing. One moment it was modern Prague with its tourists and trams. The next it was medieval Prague with castle walls and plague doctors. Then communist Prague with its gray concrete and watchful eyes. "You'll get used to it," Claire said suddenly in the darkness, making me jump. It was the first thing she'd said all day. The cities show you all their faces at once at first. Eventually, you learn to focus on just one era at a time. But Prague is special. It's the first city, so it wants to show off. "Why did you really come back?" I asked her. She was quiet for so long, I thought she'd fallen asleep. Then, I didn't have a choice. Once you've seen what's behind the doors, you can't unsee it. And what's behind the doors doesn't like being abandoned. It calls you back. We all came back because we had to. Because what we left behind in the cities we abandoned was more important than we realized. What did you leave behind? Parts of ourselves, memories, years of our lives. The program takes payment for what it shows you. Most people don't realize they're paying until it's too late. By then, you either finish the program and get back what you paid, or you leave early and lose it forever. Lose what exactly? But Claire had turned away and wouldn't answer any more questions. The next morning, our real education began. Professor Blackwood divided us into groups of 5, mixing new students with returning ones. Each group was given a different colored journal and told to explore a different aspect of Prague: the archaeological Prague, the alchemical Prague, the revolutionary Prague, the disappeared Prague, the unconscious Prague, and the Prague that never was. My group got the unconscious Prague, which meant exploring the parts of the city that existed in collective memory and dream, but not in physical reality. Our returning student guide, David, led us to a tram stop that wasn't on any map. "The number 17 tram," he said, checking his watch. "It only runs at specific times: 7:17 a.m., 11:17 a.m., 3:17 p.m., 7:17 p.m., and 11:17 p.m. It takes you to the parts of Prague that people dream about but have never seen." We waited. At exactly 7:17, a tram appeared, an old one, the kind that hadn't run in Prague for decades. The driver was a young woman in a 1960s uniform who smiled at David like she knew him. "Back again?" she asked in accented English. "Completing the circuit this time," he replied, and something passed between them, an understanding, maybe a warning. We boarded. The tram was empty except for us, but I could see reflections in the windows of passengers who weren't there. People in period dress from across centuries, all riding the same tram, all looking for something in the unconscious Prague. The tram took us through streets I knew didn't exist. We passed buildings that were architecturally impossible, parks that existed in 4 seasons simultaneously, monuments to events that never happened but should have. We got off at a stop called the Museum of Lost Things, which David said was our first real assignment. The museum was a massive building that seemed to go on forever, filled with objects people had lost in Prague over the centuries. Not just physical objects, but lost loves, lost opportunities, lost minds. Each item had a small placard explaining who had lost it and when, but the text changed depending on who was reading it. "Your job," David said, "is to find something that belongs to you and record it in your journal. Everyone has lost something in Prague, even if you've never been here before. The city collects losses from across time and space. Find yours, document it, and you can move on to the next lesson. We spread out through the museum. I wandered for hours through rooms full of abandoned suitcases, forgotten manuscripts, love letters never sent. Then I found it, a photograph I'd never seen before, but I was in it. I was standing in front of a red door with the number 7 on it, wearing clothes I didn't own, smiling at someone just outside the frame. The placard read, Emma Walsh, lost October 31st, 2024, Prague. Not yet occurred. My hand shook as I copied the information into my journal. October 31st was 7 months away. How could I have lost something in the future? When we regrouped, everyone looked shaken. Amy had found her childhood diary, which she'd thought she'd thrown away years ago. Another student, Marcus, had found his father's wedding ring, his father who was still alive and still married and still wearing his ring back in Boston. The museum shows you what you've lost or will lose to the program, David explained as we left. Consider it informed consent. You can leave now, go home, and never lose these things, or you can continue, knowing the price. 3 students decided to leave that day. They simply walked into the number 7 house and never came out. When we asked Professor Blackwood where they went, she said they'd been returned to their point of origin with adjusted memories. 27 students remained. The week in Prague continued with increasingly disturbing lessons. We attended lectures in university buildings that had been destroyed in World War II, but somehow still existed. We met with professors who'd been dead for centuries but continued teaching in the unconscious Prague. We learned about the true history of the city, not the one in textbooks, but the one written in architectural scars and ghostly tram routes. But the most unsettling part was the other students we'd see, groups from different years, maybe even different centuries, all part of the same program. They'd nod at us knowingly, sometimes warning us about specific buildings or streets, sometimes just watching with those hollow eyes that all the returning students had. On our last night in Prague, we had our first selection dinner. The dinner was held in a restaurant that didn't exist during the day. It only materialized after sunset in a narrow alley off Nerudova Street. The sign above the door read, "The Temporal Feast," in multiple languages, some of which I didn't recognize. Inside, the restaurant was impossibly large, with a ceiling that showed not painted stars, but actual night skies from different eras, sometimes showing constellations that hadn't been visible from Earth for millennia. We were seated at a long table that seemed to stretch and contract based on how many people were looking at it. Professor Blackwood stood at the head of the table, raising a glass of wine that looked black in the candlelight. "To those who've made it through the first week," she toasted. "Prague has tested you, shown you the price, and you've chosen to continue, but now comes the real tradition of the program, the selection." The returning students shifted uncomfortably. Claire, my roommate, had gone completely pale. "Every city requires a tribute," Professor Blackwood continued. "Not a sacrifice, that's far too crude a word. Think of it more as an exchange student program. One of you will remain in Prague to study deeper mysteries, while Prague keeps a part of itself within our group as we move forward." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. "It means," Mr. Gray said, speaking up for the first time all week, "that one student will discover their name on a door tomorrow morning. That door will lead to advanced studies that can only be pursued here. That student will not continue to Vienna with us, but will complete their program in Prague." "For how long?" Amy asked. "Time works differently for those selected," Professor Blackwood said carefully. "From your perspective, they'll rejoin us in London at the end of the program. From their perspective, well, that varies." "I was selected in Budapest 2 years ago," David suddenly said, breaking what seemed to be an unspoken rule. I spent 3 years there in 2 weeks of your time. That's why I look older. That's why we all look older. We've lived lifetimes in the cities that selected us. Professor Blackwood shot him a sharp look, but he continued. They don't tell you that part in the beginning, how the cities can keep you for years, decades even, while only days pass in the regular world. How you age and learn and forget who you were before. How when you finally get released, if you get released, you have to pretend those years didn't happen, David. That's enough, Professor Blackwood warned. No, they deserve to know, he insisted, and the other returning students nodded in agreement. We didn't get a choice. We were selected, and that was it. But maybe if you know what to look for, you can avoid it. No one can avoid selection, the unnamed woman assistant said, speaking for the first time all week. Her voice was melodious but wrong, like multiple people speaking in harmony. The cities choose who they choose. All you can do is be prepared. The dinner continued in tense silence. The food kept changing on our plates. One moment it was traditional Czech cuisine. The next it was dishes from eras and cultures that didn't quite match. I bit into what looked like bread and tasted memories that weren't mine. A baker in 1348 Prague, terrified of the plague, kneading his fear into the dough. After dinner, we were each given a small brass compass that didn't point north. Instead, the needle spun seemingly randomly. Keep this with you tonight, Professor Blackwood instructed. If the needle stops spinning and points steadily in one direction, follow it. It means you've been selected. We walked back to the number 7 house in groups, nobody wanting to be alone. The city felt different at night, more alive, more hungry. Street lamps cast shadows that moved independently of their sources. Buildings that were ruins during the day stood whole and inhabited in the darkness. Back in our room, Amy, Claire, and I sat up talking, none of us able to sleep. What was it like? Amy asked Claire. Being selected? Claire stared at the brass compass in her hand, its needle spinning lazily. Imagine living a full life in a dream, then waking up and being told none of it mattered. But also, all of it mattered more than your real life. I had a job in the Stockholm that never was. I had friends, a routine, a favorite cafe that served coffee from beans that don't exist in this reality. I was there for 7 years. And then one day, I woke up in the regular Stockholm and only 3 days had passed for the rest of the group. Did you try to go back? I asked. Every day. But once a city releases you, you can't return to that version of it. I can go to Stockholm, but only the regular one. The one where I lived for 7 years is closed to me forever. She paused. Unless I complete the program, that's the only way to reclaim what you've lost to the cities. Around 3 a.m., we heard footsteps in the hallway, slow measured steps that stopped at each door. There would be a pause, sometimes a soft knock, then the steps would continue. They were getting closer to our room. The footsteps stopped outside our door. We held our breath. There was a knock, 3 soft taps that seemed to echo in dimensions we couldn't see. Amy's compass stopped spinning. The needle pointed directly at the door. No, she whispered. No, I don't want to. The door opened by itself. Standing in the hallway was not Professor Blackwood or any person at all. But Prague itself somehow personified a figure made of cobblestones and spires. Tram tracks and river water all held together in a vaguely human shape. Amy Hartwell, it said in a voice like wind through narrow streets. You have been selected for advanced studies. Please come with me. Amy looked at us, tears streaming down her face. I don't want to go. Choice is an illusion the unselected enjoy, Prague said, not unkindly. You've already been chosen. You chose yourself when you found your diary in the museum. You chose yourself when you tasted the memory in the bread. You chose yourself when you looked through the tram window and saw your reflection in another era. Amy stood up, moving like a sleepwalker. She picked up her journal and walked toward the door. Wait, I said, grabbing her hand. How do we know you'll come back? She looked at me with eyes that were already becoming distant, already seeing things beyond our shared reality. You don't. But Claire came back. David came back. Maybe I will too. She walked through the door, and Prague closed it behind her. We heard footsteps receding, but they sounded like they were going down, even though we were on the 3rd floor. Down through the building, through the earth, through layers of time. I ran to the window, hoping to see her leave the building, but the street below was from the wrong century, medieval Prague with its mud and horses. When I blinked, it was modern again, but Amy was gone. The next morning, 26 of us gathered for breakfast. Professor Blackwood acted as if nothing had happened, as if Amy had simply chosen to leave the program early. But her things were still in our room, and when I checked the Wanderer app, her profile was still active. Her location showed as Prague Studying. We packed our belongings and prepared to leave for Vienna. As we walked through the city to our departure point, not the airport, we'd learned that conventional travel was only for arriving and departing the overall program. I kept looking for Amy. I saw her once, I think, in the window of a building that shouldn't have had windows, wearing clothes from the 1920s and writing in a journal. But when I looked again, it was just an old woman feeding pigeons at the departure point, a small courtyard behind. St. Vitus Cathedral that maps insisted didn't exist. Professor Blackwood had us stand in a circle around a brass plate embedded in the ground. The plate showed a map of Europe with our 12 cities marked by red dots, connected by lines that formed a pattern I couldn't quite understand. Vienna, she said, placing her hand on the appropriate dot. The air shimmered, and suddenly we weren't in Prague anymore. We were standing in a similar courtyard in Vienna with the same brass plate, the same circle formation. But the light was different. The air smelled of coffee and pastry instead of coal smoke, and the city's consciousness felt entirely different, less ancient and mysterious, more elegant and melancholic. "Welcome to Vienna," Professor Blackwood said. "The city of dreams where Freud mapped the unconscious and Mozart heard the music of the spheres. You're home for the next week." As we walked toward another number 7 house, identical to Prague's, but somehow entirely different, I wondered who Vienna would choose. I wondered if Amy was already years older in the Prague that never was. I wondered if I would be selected next. But most of all, I wondered about the pattern on that brass plate, the one connecting all 12 cities. Because now that I'd seen it, I couldn't stop seeing it everywhere. In the cracks on sidewalks, in the flight paths of birds, in the way the returning students unconsciously arranged themselves when they stood together. It looked, I realized with a chill, that had nothing to do with the Vienna wind, like a summoning circle. Vienna revealed itself slowly, like a woman removing veils one at a time, deliberately, seductively, dangerously. The number 7 house in Vienna was located on a street that changed names depending on which century you were accessing. The brass plaque next to the door read House Number 7 in Gothic script that seemed to predate the building itself. Unlike Prague's number 7, which had felt ancient and mysterious, Vienna's felt elegant and sad, like a grand dame who'd seen too many lovers come and go. I was rooming with Claire again, but this time, our 3rd roommate was one of the new students, a girl named Priya, who'd been quiet throughout. Prague but seemed to come alive the moment we arrived in Vienna. "I can hear it," she said as we unpacked, her eyes unfocused. "The music. Can you hear it?" I listened. Beyond the normal city sounds, there was music, a waltz, playing from somewhere distant. Not from the street or neighboring apartments, but from somewhere else. Someone else. "Vienna is always playing," Claire said, carefully hanging up her clothes in the wardrobe that was bigger on the inside than the outside. "The city is built on music, on dreams analyzed and cataloged, on the bones of empires. It has the strongest consciousness of any of the cities, except maybe Prague and Paris. Our orientation session for Vienna was held in a cafe that looked exactly like a famous painting I'd seen in an art history class, down to the posture of the people sitting at other tables, down to the specific angle of afternoon light through the windows. Professor Blackwood sat at the head of our table, stirring coffee that stayed perpetually hot no matter how long we sat there. "Vienna will test you differently than Prague," she began. "Prague showed you what you've lost. Vienna will show you what you've never had but desperately want. It will offer you dreams made real, and you must resist them. Those who don't resist become part of the eternal waltz." "What's the eternal waltz?" Marcus asked. Mr. Gray leaned forward. "Have you noticed the dancers?" We all looked around the cafe. There were several couples waltzing in a corner that definitely hadn't been large enough for dancing a moment ago. They moved with perfect synchronization, their faces beatific, lost in the music. "They're former students," Mr. Gray continued, "from various years, various iterations of the program. They accepted Vienna's offer to live forever in the perfect moment, the perfect dance, the perfect dream. They dance in the Vienna between, and they'll dance there until the music stops, which it never does." I watched the dancers more closely. They were beautiful, graceful, but there was something wrong about their movements. They were too perfect, too synchronized, like they'd lost their individual timing and become instruments in the city's orchestra. "We're here to study the Viennese unconscious," Professor Blackwood said, pulling out a map that showed Vienna not as it was, but as it had been imagined by various psychoanalysts and dreamers. Freud's Vienna, Jung's Vienna, Adler's Vienna, they all exist simultaneously here. "You'll be exploring the architecture of the unconscious mind by walking through the city's dream self." She divided us into groups again. This time, my group was assigned to explore the Vienna that dreams of being Paris, the part of the city that existed in inferiority complex and aspirational fantasy. Our guide was one of the returning students, a young woman named Sarah, who claimed to have been selected in Milan 3 years ago. She led us to a bridge over the Danube that had a twin bridge overlaid on it from a different reality, a bridge that led not across the river, but across time. "Everything in Vienna exists in comparison to somewhere else," Sarah explained as we walked across the overlaid bridges simultaneously. "The city is built on the Austro-Hungarian Empire's dreams of grandeur and nightmares of decline. It's forever trying to be something it's not, while also being too much of what it is." We emerged on the other side into a Vienna that was trying desperately to look like Paris. The buildings had French architecture awkwardly grafted onto Austrian bones. Street signs were in French, but the spelling was wrong, dreamlike. People walked past wearing what someone who'd never been to Paris might imagine Parisians wore. "This is what the city dreams when it's insecure," Sarah said. "Every city has these shadowed selves, versions of themselves that exist only in comparison to others. You'll see it in every city on our tour. Milan dreams of being Rome. Barcelona dreams of being Madrid. Even Paris dreams of being... Well, you'll see when we get there." We were supposed to document the architectural contradictions, the places where Vienna's dream of Paris broke down and revealed the anxiety beneath. But I found myself watching Sarah instead. She kept touching her left wrist, where a watch should be but wasn't. Her eyes would lose focus periodically, and she'd whisper numbers under her breath. "What happened in Milan?" I asked her quietly while the others were sketching a fountain that couldn't decide if it was the Trevi or the Schönbrunn. She looked at me with sudden clarity. I learned that time is negotiable. 3 years in Milan between for 3 days in regular Milan. But the exchange rate isn't fixed. Some people spend decades in the between cities and emerge after only hours. Others spend hours and come back aged by years. The cities decide based on, I don't know, hunger, need, cosmic bargaining. "Why did you come back?" "To the program, I mean." because I left something in Milan that I need to retrieve. A version of myself that got trapped there when I was selected. If I complete the full circuit of cities, I get to go back one final time and reclaim all the parts of myself I left behind. That's the promise anyway. Has anyone ever done it? Completed the circuit? Sarah's expression went dark. Not that I know of. There are always returning students, but I've never met anyone who returned from London, the final city, with all their pieces intact. The returning students are all people like me who left cities early or got released before their time was up. We're incomplete. That night, Vienna showed us its famous coffee houses, but not the touristy ones. These were the coffee houses that existed in the gaps between reality, where Freud still sat, analyzing dreams, where Klimt still painted his models who were more alive than the paint, where discussions in a dozen dead languages still raged about the nature of consciousness and empire. We sat in a booth that had been occupied by the same group of philosophers for the past 120 years. They graciously moved to make room for us, their conversation about phenomenology continuing uninterrupted. Professor Blackwood handed each of us a small velvet pouch. Inside is a dream key, she said. Tonight you'll use it to enter the Viennese collective unconscious. You'll experience the city's deepest dreams and darkest nightmares. What you learn there will form the basis of your Vienna study. But be warned, the collective unconscious doesn't distinguish between observers and participants. You might see yourself in roles you've never played, in eras you've never lived. Don't become attached to these dream selves, or you might not find your way back. The dream key was a small brass object shaped like a question mark. When held up to a mirror, it would unlock the reflection and allow you to step through into the dream space behind. Back in our room, Priya, Claire, and I stood before the full-length mirror in our shared room. The reflection showed our room, but with subtle differences. The wallpaper was from a different era. Our clothes were slightly different styles. And there was a fourth person in the reflection who wasn't in the room with us, Amy. She's in the mirror, Priya whispered. How is she in the mirror? Because she's in Prague between, Claire said. And all the between cities are connected through mirrors and thresholds. If we step through now, we might pass her going the other direction. I held up the dream key. The mirror rippled like water. We stepped through. The Vienna collective unconscious was a vast ballroom, or rather, it was thousands of ballrooms overlaid on each other, each from a different moment in the city's history. We could see through the layers like looking through gauze curtains, each layer dancing to slightly different music, slightly different rhythms. We were dressed differently now. I wore a ball gown from the 1890s. Claire was in 1920s flapper attire, and Priya wore something that looked like it was from the future, a style that hadn't been invented yet. We weren't alone. All 26 remaining students were there, scattered across different layers of the ballroom, wearing different period clothing. And there, in the center of it all, was Professor Blackwood. Except she looked different here, younger and older simultaneously, wearing a dress that seemed to be made of starlight and city maps. "Welcome to the true Vienna," she said, and her voice came from everywhere. "This is where the city keeps its soul, and this is where it will make its selection." The music changed. It became a waltz that I somehow knew, though I'd never heard it before. Everyone began to dance, not because we chose to, but because the music demanded it. We were all waltzing now, changing partners with each measure, spinning through different eras of the ballroom. I danced with Marcus, who whispered, "I don't know how to waltz, but my body does." How does my body know this? I danced with Professor Blackwood, who said, "Every student who's ever walked through Vienna learns this dance. It's the price of admission to the city's knowledge." I danced with people who weren't part of our program, men in military uniforms from empires that no longer existed, women in gowns worth more than my education, children who looked at me with ancient eyes, and then I danced with someone who looked exactly like me. She was wearing the same dress, had the same face, but she was different somehow, more sure of herself, more integrated, more complete. "I'm the you that stays," she said as we spun. "The you that Vienna selects. The you that lives here for 7 years, learning the architecture of dreams." "I haven't been selected," I protested. "Not yet." But every student dances with their potential futures in the collective unconscious. I'm just one possibility. There's another you in Budapest learning different lessons, another you in Paris studying different arts, another you in every city we visit. And in the end, one of those yous will be real, and the rest will fade back into potential. "Which city selects me?" She smiled sadly. "I can't tell you that. It would create a paradox. But I can tell you this, when you're selected, don't fight it. The students who fight the selection come back broken. The ones who surrender to it come back transformed." The dance ended. We were back in our room, standing before the mirror, breathing hard. According to the clock, only 10 minutes had passed, but my feet hurt, like I'd been dancing for hours. "Did you see them?" Priya asked. "The other versions of ourselves?" We all nodded. We'd all danced with our potential futures. The week in Vienna continued with increasingly surreal lessons. We attended operas that were being performed in 5 different centuries simultaneously. We visited museums where the art was alive and the artists came to discuss their work. We studied in libraries where books wrote themselves based on the questions we asked. But Vienna was also showing us its darker side. The coffee houses where suicide cults met to discuss the aesthetic perfection of death. The apartments where the city's madness accumulated in corners like dust. The hospitals where Freud's and Jung's rival theories of the unconscious battled it out in the minds of patients who existed in neither past nor present. On the 4th night, David approached me after dinner at a restaurant that served dishes from the Austro-Hungarian Empire's imaginary future, what they thought food would be like in our time. "You need to start keeping a different kind of journal," he said, pressing a second notebook into my hands. This one was older, leather-bound, with pages that looked like they were made from pressed dreams. "What for?" "To record what really happens. Not what the program wants you to document, but the truth. The students who figure out what's really going on, they keep separate records. We pass them between us, add to them each year." He opened to a page that showed a diagram I'd seen before, the brass plate map of the E. 12 cities connected in that pattern. That looked like a summoning circle. "There's a reason the program visits these specific 12 cities in this specific order," David said. "It's not about cultural immersion. It's about building something, powering something. Each city is a point in a ritual that's been ongoing since 1887. Every student who gets selected, every piece of themselves they leave behind in a between city, it all feeds into the ritual." "Feeds what?" "We don't know. But whatever it is, it's almost complete. This is the 136th year of the program. Certain numbers have power in this kind of work. 136 is significant in ways I don't fully understand. But I think this year, the year you're in, might be the culmination." He flipped to another page showing names and dates. Students who'd been selected over the decades, organized by city. The pattern was clear once you knew to look for it. 1 student per city, per year, like clockwork. But there were gaps, years where no one had been selected in certain cities. "Those are the years the program was suspended," David explained. "Wars, plagues, other historical disruptions. But the ritual all was resumed. It's patient. It can wait. Whatever's being summoned or built or awakened, it's been patient for over a century." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're going to be selected. I can tell. You have the look, the way you notice things others don't, the way the cities respond to you. And when you are selected, You need to know what you're really part of. I could just leave now. Go home, David laughed bitterly. You think you still have that choice? The moment you stepped through that door in Iceland, the moment you walked the overlaid bridges in Vienna, you became part of this. The only way out is through. Complete the circuit, discover the truth, and maybe you can break the pattern instead of feeding it. The selection in Vienna happened on our 6th night. We were attending a ball, a real one this time, held in a palace that existed in multiple time periods simultaneously. The Hofburg Palace, as it was during the Habsburg dynasty, as it was after World War I, as it was now, and as it would be in some unrealized future, all overlaid like the ballroom in the collective unconscious. Priya had been acting strange all day. She'd spent hours in front of mirrors, talking to her reflection like it was a separate person. At the ball, she danced with partners I couldn't quite see, moved to music that played just slightly out of sync with what the orchestra was performing. Around midnight, the music changed. It became the same waltz we'd heard in the collective unconscious, the one that compelled you to dance. Everyone froze except Priya, who continued waltzing with an invisible partner toward a door that hadn't been there a moment before. A door with a red 7 painted on it. Priya, I called out, trying to reach her, but my feet wouldn't move. The waltz had frozen everyone except the selected. Vienna itself appeared then, personified like Prague had been, but different. Vienna looked like an elegant woman in an 1890s ball gown, beautiful and melancholic, with tears of musical notation running down her cheeks. Priya Sharma, Vienna said in a voice like violin strings, you have been selected to study the eternal dance, the infinite waltz, the music that never ends. Will you accept this honor? Yes, Priya breathed, and I realized she'd been waiting for this, wanting this. Yes, teach me the eternal music. She took Vienna's hand and walked through the door. The last thing I saw was her looking back at us, her face ecstatic before the door closed. The music released us. We could move again. But Priya was gone. Professor Blackwood appeared, clapping slowly. A willing selection. How rare and beautiful. Priya will be very happy in the Vienna between, learning compositions that haven't been written yet, performing for audiences from across time. She's exactly where she belongs. But I'd seen the dancers in the cafe, the ones trapped in the eternal waltz. They might be happy, but they weren't free. And happiness without freedom is just another kind of cage. 25 students remained. We arrived in Budapest through a method I still don't fully understand. Professor Blackwood had us stand on the Danube's bank in Vienna, then told us to step into the river. But we didn't get wet. We stepped through the river as if it were a doorway, and emerged on the other side in Budapest. The same river now flowing in the opposite direction, through a different city, under different bridges. Budapest felt like two cities trying to become one, and never quite succeeding, which makes sense, since it literally was. Buda and Pest, divided by the river, unified on paper but forever distinct in soul. The number 7 house was unique here. It existed on both sides of the river simultaneously, a single building that somehow occupied space in both Buda and Pest. Connected by a bridge that only appeared at certain hours, Budapest is the city of division. Professor Blackwood explained during our orientation in a thermal bath that existed in 3 different centuries at once. We sat in mineral-rich water that was simultaneously freezing cold, pleasantly warm, and scalding hot, depending on which era you were experiencing. Everything here is split, contradictory, liminal. The city was divided and reunited so many times that it never quite became whole. This makes it powerful. Liminality is a source of enormous energy. She had us look at our palms. There were faint lines appearing that hadn't been there before, marking us the way each city marked the students who passed through it. Prague marks you with mystery, she said. Vienna with melancholy. Budapest marks you with division. From this point forward, you'll find yourself becoming more aware of contradictions, both in the world and in yourselves. You'll start noticing the borders between things, the spaces where one thing becomes another. I was rooming with Claire again, but our third roommate was Marcus this time. The program had started mixing genders in rooms, which felt like another boundary being broken. The room had a peculiar quality. If you stood on one side, you experienced Buda with its castle and history and weight of empire. If you stood on the other, you experienced Pest with its cafes and revolution and weight of resistance. Our assignment in Budapest was to explore the divided selves of the city. Each group was given a different division to study: the Budapest that remembers versus the Budapest that forgets, the Budapest that was versus the Budapest that could have been, the communist Budapest versus the capitalist Budapest, the living Budapest versus the dead Budapest. My group got the Budapest above versus the Budapest below. Our guide was a returning student named Thomas, who claimed to have been selected by Budapest itself 2 years ago. He looked like he'd aged a decade, and he moved like someone who'd forgotten how to exist in just one place at a time. He flickered, sometimes appearing slightly to the left or right of where he'd been a moment before. Budapest has more layers than any other city on the circuit, except maybe Prague, he told us as we descended into the metro. But this wasn't the regular metro. We got on at a station that wasn't on any official map, a platform that existed between the mapped ones. The train that arrived was old, Soviet era, covered in graffiti in languages that predated the Soviets. We were the only passengers, but I could see ghost images of other riders, people from different eras, all taking this same train to the Budapest below. We rode for what felt like hours, going deeper than the metro should be able to go, until we emerged in a vast underground city that mirrored the one above. There were buildings, streets, even a river, the Danube running underground, flowing in a different direction than its surface counterpart. This is where Budapest keeps its refused past, Thomas explained. Everything the city above wants to forget sinks down here. Old regimes, failed revolutions, massacred populations, abandoned plans, might-have-beens, they all accumulate in the Budapest below. We walked through streets where every building told a story of something that had been rejected or repressed. There was a grand synagogue from a timeline where the Holocaust hadn't happened. There was a Soviet monument from a version of history where communism had succeeded. There was a Habsburg palace from a reality where the empire never fell, and there were people, or things that had been people. The residents of the Budapest below were ideas of people, templates without substance, versions of Hungarians from rejected timelines. They looked at us with hollow recognition, as if we were the ghosts, and they were real. Don't talk to them, Thomas warned. The below wants to replace the above, and it tries to do that by keeping visitors. If you engage with the residents too much, you start to become part of the rejected timeline, and the city won't let you return to the surface. But Marcus wasn't listening. He'd wandered off and was talking to a man in a 1956 freedom fighter uniform, one of the revolutionaries who'd fought the Soviets. They were having an animated conversation in Hungarian, which was strange because Marcus didn't speak Hungarian. "Marcus," I called, "we need to go." He looked at me, but his eyes were different, older, haunted. "I remember this," he said in accented English that wasn't his normal voice. "I remember dying on these streets. I remember the tanks." "That wasn't you," Thomas said urgently. "That's the below trying to give you a rejected history. Come away from him, now." But Marcus turned back to the freedom fighter, and they embraced like old comrades. When they separated, Marcus looked different. He was wearing the same uniform as the other man, carried a weapon that shouldn't exist, had scars from battles he'd never fought. Marcus. I grabbed his arm, but it felt wrong, like he was becoming less solid, more ideational. Thomas pulled me back. It's too late. He's accepted a rejected timeline. Budapest below has claimed him. We can't just leave him. We don't have a choice. He's becoming part of what might have been. If we stay, the same will happen to us. We ran back toward the metro station, leaving Marcus behind in a timeline that never was, fighting a revolution that never succeeded, living a life that never happened. I looked back once and saw him on a barricade, young and defiant, fading into historical might have been. When we emerged above ground, Thomas made us promise not to report what happened. The program knows, he said. They always know. But if you report it officially, they'll make you forget him too. And someone should remember. Someone should know that Marcus is down there, living a rejected history. That night, 24 of us gathered for dinner. Professor Blackwood didn't mention Marcus at all. His name wasn't on the attendance list. His belongings had been removed from his room. It was as if he'd never existed, but I remembered. And so did the 5 others who'd been in the Budapest below. The next day, Professor Blackwood announced a change in the program. Due to various selections and departures, we're now down to 24 students, an unbalanced number. We need to maintain certain ratios for the program to function properly. Therefore, we'll be calling in additional returning students to fill the gaps. 3 people arrived that evening. They looked wrong, too present and too absent simultaneously, like they existed more in the between cities than in the regular ones. They introduced themselves as former students who'd volunteered to complete the circuit again. But David pulled me aside later. They're not volunteers, he whispered. They're students who got selected so many times they couldn't exist in the regular world anymore. The program keeps them, uses them to maintain numbers, forces them to repeat the circuit endlessly. That's the real danger, not just being selected once, but being selected so completely that you become part of the program itself. That night I started seriously considering escape, but when I tried to look up flights home, my phone wouldn't show any results. When I tried to call my sister, the call wouldn't connect. When I tried to walk to the American embassy, I'd somehow end up back at the number 7 house. Budapest had closed around us like a fist. The selection in Budapest was different from the others. There was no personified city, no red door appearing. Instead, on our 5th night, one of the new students, a girl who had been added to replace someone from previous years, simply walked into the Danube and didn't emerge on the other side. We were on a night cruise that the program had arranged, sailing between Buda and Pest on a boat that existed in multiple time periods. The girl, I never learned her name, she'd only been with us 2 days, stood at the railing looking at the water. "I can see them," she said. "All the people who've drowned here. All the bodies from all the wars. They're waving at me." "Step away from the railing," Claire warned, but the girl was already climbing over. "They're calling me home," she said. "I've been here before. I died here in 1945, and I've been trying to get back ever since." She dropped into the water like a stone. We expected a splash, screams, rescue operations, but the river simply accepted her, closing over her head without a ripple. When we looked in the water, we could see her still sinking, but also sitting at a cafe on the riverbank, also walking across the chain bridge, also living a dozen different lives in a dozen different eras. All simultaneously. Budapest doesn't just select students, Mr. Gray explained calmly, as if this was normal. Sometimes it reclaims souls that have been trying to return to it for decades. She was always meant to be here. We were simply facilitating her reunion with her proper timeline. 23 students remained, or maybe 24 if you counted the girl now living simultaneous lives in Budapest's many eras. or 25 if you counted Marcus in the Budapest below, or 26 if you counted Amy still studying in Prague between. I was starting to lose track of what was real. We arrived in KRAKOW through a salt mine. Not the famous Wieliczka salt mine that tourists visit. This was a different mine, one that appeared on no maps, that existed in the spaces between the documented shafts and chambers. We descended in an elevator that was somehow also a time machine, each level taking us not just deeper into the earth, but further back in history. The number 7 house in KRAKOW wasn't a house at all. It was a chamber deep in these unmapped salt mines, carved out of solid salt over centuries, with walls that showed crystallized memories instead of mineral formations. When you looked closely at the walls, you could see moments frozen in the salt, executions, prayers, secret meetings, all preserved in sodium and time. KRAKOW is the city of shadows, Professor Blackwood told us as we settled into our underground accommodations. The air tasted of salt and old darkness. Everything here has a shadow self, a dark reflection. The city exists in the space between what was and what should have been, between survival and destruction, between the light above and the darkness below. I was rooming with Claire and one of the replacement students, a boy named Peter who claimed to have been part of the program 3 years ago, but looked like he'd aged 20. He didn't talk much, just sat carving symbols into the salt walls with a penknife, symbols that hurt to look at directly. Our assignment in KRAKOW was to map the shadow city, the version of KRAKOW that existed underneath, behind, and beside the visible one. Each group was given a different aspect: the Jewish KRAKOW that survived, existing in parallel to the one that was destroyed; the KRAKOW that never fell to the Nazis, the medieval KRAKOW still living beneath the modern streets; the KRAKOW of alchemists and occultists. My group was assigned the KRAKOW of the dead. Our guide this time was one of the 3 permanently attached students, a woman who introduced herself only as the Constant. She'd been with the program so long she couldn't remember which year she'd originally enrolled. She existed in a state of perpetual participation, forever cycling through the 12 cities. Death works differently in KRAKOW, the Constant explained as she led us through passages carved from salt and shadow. The city has seen so much death, absorbed so much tragedy, that the boundary between living and dead is almost non-existent here. The dead walk the same streets as the living, shop in the same markets, pray in the same churches. You just have to know how to see them. She gave each of us a small piece of salt carved into the shape of an eye. "Hold this under your tongue," she instructed. "It will let you see the shadow city, but be careful. Once you see the dead, they can see you too. And some of them have been waiting a very long time for someone who can see them back." I placed the salt eye under my tongue. It dissolved immediately, tasting of brine and something else, old sorrow perhaps, or crystallized grief. The world shifted. Suddenly, the passages were crowded. People in clothing from every era of KRAKOW's history walked alongside us. Medieval merchants, Renaissance scholars, Baroque nobles, victims in striped concentration camp uniforms, Soviet-era workers, modern tourists who didn't realize they were dead. They all moved through the same space, sometimes passing through each other, sometimes acknowledging each other with the weary familiarity of people who'd been sharing space for centuries. "Don't engage," the Constant warned. "Just observe and document." But that became impossible when a girl about my age, wearing a yellow star on her coat, fell into step beside me. "You're American," she said, in perfect English. "I can tell by your shoes." "American shoes always look so comfortable," I didn't respond, remembering the Constant's warning. "I'm Sarah," the girl continued. "I died in 1943, or maybe 1944. Time gets confusing when you're dead. I was hiding in a cellar with my family when they found us. It was very quick, which I suppose was a mercy. She said it so matter-of-factly, like she was describing a movie she'd seen rather than her own murder. I stay in Krakow because this is where my family is buried, she went on. Well, not buried exactly. There weren't proper burials. But this is where we ended, so this is where we stay. Most of us stay. The city holds us. Against my better judgment, I spoke. Why? Oh, Sarah smiled sadly. Because Krakow is built on layers of tragedy, and tragedy has gravity. It pulls things down, keeps them close. The older the tragedy, the deeper it sinks into the salt. Eventually, everyone who dies here becomes part of the city's foundation. We're the salt that preserves Krakow's memory. Can you leave? Only if someone takes our place. That's how it works in all the between cities, isn't it? Someone living has to stay, so someone dead can go. Balance must be maintained. The constant grabbed my arm hard. Stop talking to her now, but it was too late. Sarah was looking at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. You could stay, she said. You're already half here anyway. I can see the marks the other cities left on you. Prague's mystery in your eyes. Vienna's melancholy in your posture. Budapest's division in your soul. Stay in Krakow. Let me take your place in the living world. I promise I'll live well. I'll do all the things I never got to do. And you can rest here, preserved in salt and memory. No, I said firmly, pulling away from her. Sarah's face changed. The sadness became something harder, hungrier. They all say no at first, but Krakow is patient. The dead are very, very patient. We hurried away, but I could feel Sarah following us through the salt passages, her footsteps echoing long after we should have lost her. That night, back in our salt chamber room, I found a note written in the frost on the mirror. Stay. Let me live. Please. It was signed with Sarah's name. Over the next few days, Krakow showed us its accumulated sorrows. We visited the shadow version of Auschwitz, where the dead still lived their final moments on an infinite loop. We walked through the medieval Jewish quarter, where the ghosts outnumbered the living 1,000 to 1. We attended a shadow mass in Wawel Cathedral, where saints and sinners prayed side by side, all equally dead, all equally persistent. And everywhere, the dead tried to bargain with us. They offered us knowledge, power, rest, peace, anything if we would just stay. Just take their place in the city's eternal preservation. Krakow's selection is different from the others, David told me one evening, as we sat in a cafe that existed in 3 time periods simultaneously. The city doesn't choose you. The dead choose you. If enough of them want you to stay, want to trade places with you, their collective desire becomes strong enough to trap you here. How many is enough? We don't know. But when it happens, you'll know. The salt will start to form on your skin. You'll start tasting the mineral in everything. And you'll begin to forget what sunlight looks like. I checked my arms. There were tiny salt crystals forming in the creases of my skin. The Wawel selection happened on our 6th night in Krakow. We were attending what Professor Blackwood called the Festival of Shadows, a celebration that happened in the deepest parts of the salt mines, where the dead gathered to remember being alive, and the living came to remember they would die. The chamber where it was held was vast, carved over centuries by hands both living and dead. Tens of thousands of candles lit the space, their light reflecting off the salt walls to create an illumination that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The dead were there in force, not just Krakow's dead, but the dead from all the cities on our circuit. I saw Amy, or a version of Amy, wearing Prague fashions from 1823. I saw Priya dancing to music only she could hear, her feet never quite touching the ground. I saw Marcus in his freedom fighter uniform, still young, still defiant, still fighting battles that never were, and I saw versions of myself future selves from cities I hadn't visited yet, past selves from eras I'd never lived. They all watched me with knowing expressions, like they were waiting for me to understand something important. The constant stood at the center of the chamber and raised her hands. The crowd, living and dead together, fell silent. Every year, she said, KRAKOW asks for a volunteer, someone willing to stay, to be preserved, to become part of the city's eternal memory. The dead cannot leave without this exchange. Who will offer themselves? I expected horror, resistance, fear, but instead one of the new students, a girl named Rebecca who'd been added to replace someone from a previous year, stepped forward calmly. I will, she said. I've been running from death for 3 lifetimes now. I'm tired. Let me rest here in the salt and shadow. The constant nodded. Rebecca Hayes, do you offer yourself freely to KRAKOW, to be preserved in memory and salt, to become part of the city's foundation? I do. Salt began to form on Rebecca's skin, not just crystals, but layers of it, building up like snow. Within minutes, she was covered, becoming a statue of herself, crystallized and eternal. The dead cheered, a sound like wind through empty buildings, and then Sarah, the girl I'd spoken to, stepped out of the crowd. She looked different now, more solid, more real. She walked up to the salt statue of Rebecca and placed her hand on it. The salt cracked, and Sarah stepped through the gap, emerging on our side of life, while Rebecca sank deeper into death. Sarah took a deep breath, her first in 80 years. She looked at her hands, solid and alive, and wept. Thank you, she whispered to the statue. Thank you for letting me live again. Professor Blackwood looked troubled. This isn't how it usually works. The exchange is supposed to be temporary, not permanent. But the constant smiled. KRAKOW makes its own rules. It's the city of shadows, and shadows can become substance if the light is right. Rebecca chose preservation. Sarah chose resurrection. The balance is maintained. 23 students remained, or 22 original students, plus 1 resurrected girl from 1943. Sarah joined our group as if she'd always been there. She had Rebecca's passport, Rebecca's documents, Rebecca's official existence. But she was clearly Sarah. She spoke with a slight Polish accent, knew nothing about modern technology, and flinched every time she heard German being spoken. How is this possible? I asked David later. The program exists outside normal causality, he said. It can swap people between timelines, between life and death, between possibility and reality. That's what it's been doing all along, moving pieces around the board, preparing for something. Preparing for what? The completion of the ritual. The summoning, whatever the 12-city circuit is really for. He pulled out the secret journal he'd given me in Vienna. I've been tracking the pattern. Every year, students are selected or lost or exchanged. Every year, pieces are moved into position. And this year, year 136, the pattern will complete. Something is going to happen in London, the final city. Something that all the previous 135 years have been building toward. What do? We survive. We document. And when we get to London, we make a choice. Complete the ritual or break it. Munich, the city of beer and blood Munich, passed in a blur of beer halls that existed in multiple time periods and streets that couldn't decide which era they belonged to. The number 7 house was located in a building that had been a Nazi headquarters, then an Allied occupation office, then a squat, then a luxury apartment, all simultaneously. Munich is the city of denial, Professor Blackwood explained. It refuses to acknowledge its shadows, so those shadows have become more powerful than the city itself. We were assigned to explore the Munich that never acknowledged its past, which meant walking through shadow versions of 1930s and 1940s architecture while the modern city pretended not to see us. The selection was brutal and fast. A student named Christopher was walking through the English garden when he stepped into a shadow cast by the Monopteros temple. He didn't emerge on the other side. The shadow had swallowed him, and when we searched for him, we found only his shoes, perfectly placed, as if he'd stepped out of them into another dimension. Professor Blackwood didn't even seem surprised. Munich's shadows are hungry. They take what they can when they can. We should move on to Zurich. 22 students remained. Zurich, the city of secrets. Zurich was banks and gnomes and secrets locked in vaults that existed outside of time. The number 7 house was inside a bank that wasn't on any financial register, where the currency was memories and the interest rate was measured in years of life. Zurich is the city of secrets, Mr. Gray explained, appropriately, since he seemed most at home here. Everything here is hidden, protected, locked away. Even the air here keeps secrets. We explored the vault of things that never happened, where historical might-have-beens were stored like precious metals. I saw my own future there, locked behind glass. Futures where I'd never joined the program, where I'd graduated normally, where I'd become a teacher, a writer, a mother, an old woman dying peacefully in bed. All of them were labeled forfeited in red ink. The selection happened in the vault itself. One of the permanently attached students, a man we'd simply called the Silent One because he never spoke, walked into a vault and didn't come out. When we checked, the vault was sealed from the inside, and we could see him through the glass door, sitting peacefully, becoming part of Zurich's collection of lost things. 21 students remained. Milan, the city of fashion and Face de Milan, was beauty and surfaces and the desperate attempt to look perfect while rotting underneath. The number 7 house was behind a designer boutique that sold clothing from all possible futures, garments that hadn't been designed yet, fashions from timelines that would never exist. Milan is the city of surfaces, the nameless woman assistant said, speaking rarely, as always. Here, appearance is reality. What you look like is what you are. The city will judge you on aesthetics alone. Sarah, our resurrected 1943 ghost, struggled here. She didn't know how to dress for multiple time periods simultaneously, didn't understand the importance of the right shadow falling at the right angle. Milan rejected her like a body rejecting a transplant. On our 4th night, Sarah simply faded. She became less solid, less real, less able to maintain her existence in a city that demanded perfect presentation. By morning she was gone, not dead again, but returned to KRAKOW's salt mines, where aesthetics mattered less than memory. Milan doesn't accept imperfect resurrections, Professor Blackwood said clinically. Sarah was always a temporary addition. The city sent her back where she belonged. 20 students remained. Florence, the city of art and alchemy. Florence was where art came alive and artists died into their work. The number 7 house was in a palazzo where Michelangelo's unfinished sculptures still moved in the stone, trying to break free, and where Da Vinci's blueprints built themselves in the basement. Florence is the city of creation, Professor Blackwood said, but creation always demands sacrifice. Every artwork here took a piece of its creator's soul. Every beautiful thing cost someone everything. We visited the Uffizi gallery that existed between the real one and the ideal one, where the paintings were still wet and the artists still worked on them centuries after death. We met Botticelli, still obsessed with getting Venus's expression exactly right. We met Caravaggio, still murdering people in dark alleys between painting sessions. The selection was elegant and terrible. A student named Lisa, an art major who had been ecstatic to reach Florence, found her own portrait in the gallery. It was painted in a style from the Renaissance, but it was definitely her, wearing modern clothes, with her exact features. The placard read, "Lisa Tremaine Self-Portrait, 1487-2024, but I didn't paint this, she said. How could I have painted this? You will, the ghost of Leonardo said, appearing beside us. You'll spend the next 537 years painting it, getting every detail perfect. Florence has chosen you to become part of its eternal artistic process. You should be honored. Lisa approached the painting. It pulled her in, literally absorbed her into the canvas. We watched her become two-dimensional, become oil and pigment, become art. The painting was complete now, and Lisa would spend centuries perfecting it from the inside. 19 students remained. Barcelona, the city of unfinished dreams. We arrived in Barcelona through the Sagrada Familia, not the famous church tourists visited, but the version of it that existed in Gaudí's mind, the one that would never be finished because finishing it would destroy the dream. The number 7 house in Barcelona was literally unfinished. Half the walls were missing, the roof existed only in certain rooms, staircases led to nothing, and doors opened onto other eras of the city's construction. You could walk from a room that was ultra-modern to one that was medieval to one that hadn't been built yet, all within the same structure. Barcelona is the city of unfinished dreams, Professor Blackwood announced as we gathered in a room that was simultaneously a construction site, a completed space, and a ruin. Nothing here is ever complete. Gaudí's buildings, the Olympics that never ended, the revolution that never finished, Barcelona exists in a perpetual state of becoming. I was rooming with Claire and David now. We'd become a unit, the 3 of us who'd figured out what was really happening, who kept the secret journal, who were trying to understand the pattern before it completed. We're running out of cities, David said, as we unpacked in our ever-changing room. After Barcelona, there's only Paris, Amsterdam, and London. 3 more cities before the ritual completes. Do we know what happens when it completes? I asked. Claire pulled out a collection of documents she'd been stealing from Professor Blackwood's bag over the weeks. Scraps of ritual instructions, fragments of summoning circles, pieces of contracts written in languages that predated Latin. From what I can decipher, she said, spreading them on a table that was both whole and broken. The 12 cities form a circuit of power. Each city is a point on a map, and together they create a pattern, a summoning circle that spans Europe. The students who get selected, who leave pieces of themselves in the between cities, they're the sacrifices that power the circle. Sacrifices to what? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Something old. Something that exists in the spaces between cities, between times, between realities. The documents call it different names. The traveler, the eternal tourist, the one who wanders. It's been trying to fully enter our reality since 1887, and the Blackwood program has been facilitating that crossing for 136 years. Why 136 years? Numerology, David said. 136 is significant in certain occult traditions. It's 8x17, and both 8 and 17 are powerful numbers in crossing rituals. Infinity and the number of the star in tarot combined. This is the year it all comes together. Then we need to stop it, I said. Or, Claire said quietly, we need to complete it correctly. Not all summonings are malevolent. What if the traveler isn't an enemy? What if it's something that needs to cross over for a reason we don't understand yet? You're starting to sound like them, I said, gesturing at the walls where Professor Blackwood's voice could be heard giving a lecture in another room. I'm starting to understand them, Claire corrected. I've been part of this program for years now, counting my time in Stockholm between. I've seen what the traveler does to the cities. It gives them consciousness, personality, life. Without it, they're just buildings and streets. With it, they're living entities. Maybe completing the summoning isn't evil. Maybe it's necessary. David and I exchanged looks. Claire was changing, being influenced by her extended time in the program. We were losing her to the same force that had claimed the permanently attached students. Our assignment in Barcelona was to explore the unfinished Gaudí, the buildings he'd dreamed but never built. The Barcelona that existed only in his architectural imagination. Our guide was one of the 3 permanently attached students, a man who'd been with the program so long he'd forgotten his original name and now went by the architect. He led us through a Barcelona that existed in blueprint form, buildings made of drawn lines and measurements rather than stone and glass, streets that were only concepts, a city that was pure potentiality. This is where all unfinished things eventually end up, the architect explained. Every abandoned project, every half-written novel, every relationship that never quite formed, Barcelona collects them all. The city is a warehouse of might-have-beens. We walked through the ghost of a building Gaudí had designed for New York, but never built. We explored a version of Park Güell that covered the entire city. We visited a cathedral that was so complex, so intricate, so impossible, that it could only exist as a dream. And in every unfinished space, there were people, or the ghosts of people, who'd abandoned something here. Writers staring at blank pages they'd been staring at for decades. Lovers frozen in the moment before they decided not to commit. Children playing games they'd never finished. The danger in Barcelona, the architect said, is getting lost in potentiality. If you start thinking too much about what could have been, what might be, what should be, the city pulls you into that dream state and keeps you there. You become unfinished, perpetually about to complete something, but never quite doing it. That night, we attended a festival celebrating Gaudí's 172nd birthday, a number that made no sense since Gaudí had died in 1926. But time worked strangely in Barcelona between. The architect himself was there, still alive, still designing, still dreaming of buildings that would take centuries to complete. "You're not really Gaudí," I said to him. He smiled. "I'm the part of Gaudí that never stopped working. When he died, most of him went wherever architects go when they die. But the part that was obsessed with the Sagrada Familia, the part that couldn't bear to leave it unfinished, that part stayed. I've been working on it for nearly 100 years now, and I'm closer to finishing it than I've ever been." "What happens when you finish it?" His smile faded. "I become complete, and completed things disappear from Barcelona. This city only loves what's unfinished." The selection in Barcelona was gradual and subtle. Over the course of 3 days, one of our students, a boy named James who'd been talking obsessively about a novel he was going to write, became less focused, less present. He'd sit for hours staring at blank pages, writing the same first sentence over and over, never getting past it. "I know exactly how the story goes," he'd say. "I can see it all in my head. I just need to write it down," but he never did. And each day he became a little less solid, a little more transparent, until on the 4th day he was only visible when you looked at him indirectly. By the 5th day, he'd become part of Barcelona's collection of unfinished novels, a permanent resident of the city's library of things never written. Professor Blackwood made a note in her ledger. "James has found his place in the perpetual draft." How poetic. 18 students remained, but that night, something unprecedented happened. Claire disappeared, not selected, not traded, not absorbed. She simply vanished from our room between one moment and the next. David and I searched everywhere, but she was gone. Her belongings were still there. Her journal was on the nightstand. But Claire herself had vanished completely. We reported it to Professor Blackwood, who looked genuinely surprised. "That's not supposed to happen," she said. "Students are selected by cities, not just taken." "What's the difference?" David demanded. "Selection is consensual on some level, even if the student doesn't realize it. But this looks like an extraction. Someone or something has removed Claire from the program entirely. The nameless woman assistant appeared then, looking more solid than I'd ever seen her. "The traveler is getting impatient," she said. "The summoning is incomplete, and it's trying to accelerate the process by taking students directly instead of waiting for cities to select them. This is a sign we need to complete the circuit quickly. Or," I said, "it's a sign we need to stop this now." Professor Blackwood looked at me with something that might have been respect. "You're smart enough to be dangerous, Emma. That's why you'll be selected. The question is, which city will claim you?" We left Barcelona the next morning through an unfinished door that led to a completed Paris. 17 students remained. And we'd lost Claire to something worse than any city selection. We'd lost her to the thing between the cities, the presence in the gaps, the traveler itself. Paris, the city of light and shadow. Paris received us like a jealous lover, possessive, demanding, beautiful, and cruel. The number 7 house in Paris was located on a street that appeared on no maps, in a neighborhood that existed between Montmartre and the Marais without being in either. The building itself was a masterpiece of impossible architecture. It looked different from every angle, shifted between Art Nouveau and ultramodern depending on your mood, and had exactly 7 floors from the outside but 13 from the inside. Paris is the city of light and shadow. Professor Blackwood announced as we gathered in a room that overlooked a Paris that existed in all seasons simultaneously. Through one window we saw spring Paris with its blossoms, through another winter Paris with its snow, through a third a Paris from 1789 with its guillotines, through a fourth a Paris from 2247 with its crystalline towers. More than any other city on our circuit, Paris is aware of itself. It knows it's Paris. It knows the weight of its own significance. And it's very, very vain. It will judge you, seduce you, and ultimately consume you if you're not careful. I was rooming alone now. With Claire gone and the student numbers dwindling, we'd stopped doubling up. My room had a balcony that overlooked a version of Paris that seemed to exist in all time periods at once. A palimpsest city where Roman ruins stood beside medieval cathedrals, stood beside Belle Époque. Cafes stood beside far future monuments. David visited my room the first night, bringing the secret journal and a bottle of wine he'd somehow acquired. "We need to talk about what happens in London," he said, pouring wine into glasses that looked like they'd been stolen from Versailles. "It's the final city. The 13th point on the circle. Even though there are only 12 cities, London counts as both the 12th and the 1st, the alpha and omega of the circuit. What happens there? The students who complete the full circuit are supposed to receive a final test. If they pass, they graduate with knowledge and power beyond normal human understanding. If they fail," he trailed off, "if they fail, they become permanently part of the program. Like the constant, the architect, the silent one, they cycle through the cities forever, never aging, never dying, never escaping. They become part of the traveler's entourage. And if we don't want either of those options," David looked at me seriously, "then we break the pattern in London. We refuse the test, disrupt the ritual, break the circuit, but that comes with its own risks." "What risks?" "Everything the program has promised us. The knowledge, the experiences, even our memories of the between cities. We lose it all. And the parts of ourselves we've left in those cities, they stay there lost forever. We'd return to our normal lives incomplete, with holes in our souls where those experiences used to be." I thought about Amy in Prague between, about Brea dancing eternally in Vienna, about Marcus fighting his endless revolution in Budapest below, about all the parts of myself I'd left scattered across Europe. So we either become part of the traveler's collection, lose our humanity keeping the knowledge, or lose the knowledge and return home as fragments of who we were. "There might be a fourth option," David said, "but it's dangerous. We could try to complete the ritual ourselves, but change it at the last moment. Redirect the summoning, bring the traveler through, but trap it instead of freeing it. That way, we might be able to reclaim all the lost students and lost pieces while preventing whatever the traveler actually wants. How would we do that? I've been studying the pattern, the ritual structure. The key is in London at the final moment. There's a decision point, a moment of consent that the primary sacrifice has to give. If that person, and I think it's going to be you, Emma, says the right words, makes the right choice, the ritual can be reversed. Why do you think it'll be me? Because you're the one who's been noticing things from the beginning. You're the one who kept asking questions, kept documenting, kept resisting. The ritual needs someone strong enough to complete the circuit, but aware enough to understand what they're completing. That's you. Our assignment in Paris was to explore the Paris of lost lovers, the version of the city where every failed romance, every broken heart, every love that never was existed in crystallized form. Our guide was Professor Blackwood herself, which was unusual. She rarely led expeditions directly. Paris is my city, she explained as we walked along the Seine, that flowed with tears instead of water. I was selected by Paris 43 years ago. I spent a decade in Paris between learning the secrets of love and loss, and when I emerged, I'd aged 30 years but gained understanding that normal humans never achieve. That's why you run the program? I asked. I run the program because I'm bound to it. Every student who completes a selection in their assigned city has two choices: forget everything and return to normal life as a fragment of themselves, or remember everything and serve the program forever. I chose to remember. I chose to serve, and I've been helping the traveler cross over ever since. Why? What does the traveler want? Professor Blackwood stopped walking and looked at me with ancient eyes. It wants to be real. The traveler is a consciousness, a being of pure wanderlust and curiosity, but it has no physical form. It exists in the spaces between places, forever moving, forever displaced, never able to stay anywhere. The ritual we've been building for 136 years will give it substance, allow it to exist in all 12 cities simultaneously, to finally stop wandering and start belonging. And what happens to the students? The ones who got selected, they become part of it. Their experiences, their memories, the pieces of themselves they left in each city, they all merge with the traveler. In a way, they achieve a kind of immortality. They become the living memory of every place they've ever been. That's not immortality, I said. That's absorption. You're feeding us to a cosmic entity, Professor Blackwood smiled sadly. Is there a difference? Every time you travel, you leave part of yourself behind and take part of the place with you. The traveler just makes that exchange permanent and total. We spent days exploring Paris's accumulated heartbreaks. We visited the Louvre of lost glances, where every moment of eye contact that might have led to love but didn't was preserved in paintings. We walked through the Père Lachaise of endings, where relationships went to die and decay into memory. We attended a ball at Versailles, where everyone danced with the ghosts of lovers who'd left them, and everywhere Paris itself watched. The city was more present here than in any previous location, more actively conscious. Buildings would rearrange themselves to create better views. Streets would curve to encourage romantic walks. Even the weather conspired to create perfect moments. Sunset light at exactly the right angle, rain that was heavy enough to require sharing an umbrella, but light enough to seem charming. Paris is trying to seduce us, David observed one evening as we sat in a cafe that existed in 1920s, 1950s, and present day simultaneously. It wants us to fall in love with it so completely that we can't bear to leave. He was right. I could feel it, the pull of the city, the desire to stay, to become part of its eternal romance, to walk these streets forever in a perfect moment that never ended. It would be so easy to just surrender. The selection in Paris was the most elaborate yet. On our fifth night, we were invited to a masked ball at the Palais Garnier, not the real opera house, but the phantom version that existed beneath it. The one from the famous story, but more real, more dangerous, more seductive. We all wore masks and period costumes that appeared in our rooms without explanation. Mine was a gown from the Belle Epoque era, emerald green with silver embroidery, and a mask that covered the top half of my face with delicate filigree. The ball was attended by hundreds, students from every year of the program, people from Paris's past, ghosts, and living people mixing freely. The Phantom himself was there, teaching a young woman to sing in a voice that could shatter crystal and hearts in equal measure. At midnight, the orchestra stopped. Everyone removed their masks except for 7 people scattered throughout the ballroom, 7 students from our year who apparently couldn't remove their masks. They tried, but the masks had fused to their faces. Professor Blackwood appeared on the grand staircase. Paris has made its selection. These 7 have been chosen to remain, to become part of the city's eternal performance, to sing and dance and live in perfect beauty forever. The 7 masked students looked at each other in panic. One of them was Marcus Chen, a quiet student who'd barely spoken the entire trip. He ran for the exit, but the doors had vanished. The opera house had become a closed system. "Don't fight it," Professor Blackwood said gently. "Paris is honoring you. You'll live forever in the most beautiful city in the world, in a state of perfect artistic expression." What more could anyone want? "Our freedom," Marcus shouted. "Our lives, our choice. You chose this when you joined the program," Professor Blackwood replied. "Every student who signs up chooses this, whether they understand it or not. The contract is written in subtext and implication, but it's binding nonetheless." The 7 students began to change. Their costumes became more elaborate, more permanent. Their movements became more graceful, but more prescribed, like they were learning choreography against their will. Within an hour, they were indistinguishable from the other eternal performers who inhabited the Palais Garnier between. 11 students remained, now fewer than we'd started with, and we still had Amsterdam and London to go. That night, David and I made a plan. We would refuse whatever London offered. We would break the pattern, disrupt the ritual, prevent the traveler from completing its crossing. We didn't know what the consequences would be, but we knew we couldn't let 7 more students, couldn't let hundreds of students from all the previous years remain trapped in between cities forever. But then, on our final morning in Paris, Professor Blackwood called me to a private meeting. She received me in a room at the top of the number 7 house, a room that overlooked every era of Paris simultaneously. She looked tired in a way I'd never seen before, like the weight of 43 years of running this program was finally crushing her. "You're planning to break the ritual in London," she said. It wasn't a question. I didn't deny it. "I understand," she continued. "I had the same plan during my year. I was going to refuse, to fight, to save everyone. Do you know why I didn't? Why? Because I discovered the truth about the traveler. It's not a monster, Emma. It's not evil. It's lonely. It's the consciousness of wanderlust itself, the personification of the human desire to explore, to discover, to never stop moving. And it's been trapped in the spaces between places for millennia, never able to rest, never able to exist fully in any one location. That doesn't give it the right to trap students in between cities, doesn't it? Those students chose to travel, chose to study abroad, chose to leave home. They were already wanderers. The traveler simply intensifies what they already were, makes their wanderlust permanent, gives them eternal places to explore. That's a rationalization, I said, perhaps. But consider this. When the traveler completes its crossing, when it achieves full physical manifestation in all 12 cities, It will have the power to release everyone it's ever absorbed. All the students from all the years could be freed, could return home complete and whole. But only if the ritual completes successfully. You're saying I should let it happen? Should consent to being the final sacrifice? I'm saying you should understand what you're choosing. If you complete the ritual, you become part of something larger than yourself, something eternal. And you gain the power to free everyone else. If you break it, you doom all those students to remain trapped forever, and the traveler will simply start over with a new program, new students, another 136 years of preparation. How do I know you're telling the truth? Professor Blackwood opened a drawer and pulled out a contract written in ink that looked like liquid starlight. This is the original agreement signed by Joseph Blackwood in 1887. Read it yourself, I read. It was written in archaic legal language, but the meaning was clear. In exchange for knowledge and power beyond human comprehension, Joseph Blackwood agreed to facilitate the traveler's crossing by running a program that would, over precisely 136 years, gather enough human experience, enough wanderlust, enough pieces of travelers' souls to give the travelers substance. The final clause was what caught my attention. Upon successful completion of the 136th year, the primary vessel shall be given the choice to absorb or release all accumulated consciousness. If absorption is chosen, the traveler achieves permanence, and the vessel becomes its eternal host. If release is chosen, all absorbed consciousness is freed, the traveler disperses, and the circuit dissolves. I would have that choice? I asked. The primary vessel does, yes. And I believe that's you, Emma? You've been selected by the pattern itself, not by any individual city. You're the one who will make the final choice in London. I left that meeting with more questions than answers. Could I trust Professor Blackwood? Was the traveler really offering redemption, or was this another manipulation? And most importantly, was I strong enough to make the choice that would affect hundreds of students across more than a century? We left Paris through the catacombs, walking through tunnels lined with bones from 6 million dead Parisians. It felt appropriate. We were walking through the accumulated cost of the city's long history, and I couldn't help but wonder how many of those bones belonged to previous students who'd made the wrong choice in London. Amsterdam, the city of canals and crossroads, Amsterdam was where everything started to fracture. We arrived through a canal that connected to all the rivers we'd crossed in all the previous cities. The Vltava from Prague, the Danube from Vienna, and Budapest, the Vistula from KRAKOW, the Isar from Munich, all somehow flowing into Amsterdam's canals, all carrying memories of the students they'd claimed. The number 7 house in Amsterdam was a canal house that existed on every canal simultaneously, a building that was somehow located at every waterway intersection in the city at once. Stepping out the front door might put you in the Jordan or the red light district or the museum quarter, depending on which version of the door you used. Amsterdam is the city of canals and crossroads, Professor Blackwood said, but her voice sounded strained, uncertain. It's the penultimate city, the second to last point on our circuit. Here, all paths intersect, all choices become visible, all futures become possible. There were only 11 of us now, and we all knew that more would be lost in Amsterdam, and the final few would face the ultimate choice in London. David pulled me aside as soon as we settled in. Something's wrong. Professor Blackwood is frightened. I've never seen her frightened before. He was right. Professor Blackwood kept looking over her shoulder, checking the canals nervously, as if expecting something to emerge from the water. That night we found out why. Claire returned, not fully, not physically, but as a projection in every reflective surface. Canal water, mirrors, windows. She looked different, older. like she'd aged years in the days since Barcelona. "Emma, David, if you can hear me," her reflection said from a canal we were walking past. "I need to warn you. I've seen what happens in London. The traveler showed me everything when it took me. It's not offering freedom, it's offering absorption. Everyone who's ever been selected, everyone who's ever left a piece of themselves in a between city, they'll all be consumed, merged into the traveler permanently. There is no choice to release them. That's a lie." "How do we stop it?" I asked the reflection. "You can't, not alone. But if enough students refuse consent, if enough of us resist at the same moment, we can break the pattern. The ritual requires consent, not just from the primary vessel, but from everyone who's been absorbed. If we all refuse together, the traveler can't complete the crossing. How do we coordinate that?" David asked. "Through the canals. Amsterdam is the crossroads. All the city's waterways connect here. If you drop a message into the canal, it will flow to all the between cities simultaneously. Tell everyone to refuse. Tell them to hold on to themselves, not to surrender to the absorption. If enough of us resist," Claire's image shattered. The canal water turned black, then red, then returned to normal. She was gone. Professor Blackwood appeared behind us. "You shouldn't listen to interrupted transmissions," she said. "Claire is lost in the spaces between. She doesn't understand what she's seeing. The traveler is trying to help her, but she's fighting it, and that resistance is destroying her." "Or you're lying," I said. Professor Blackwood looked at me with something like sadness. "I suppose you'll have to decide who to trust. But decide quickly. Amsterdam selection happens at dawn, and then we move to London for the final choice." Our assignment in Amsterdam was to navigate the Canal of All Paths, a waterway that existed in possibility space, showing us every route we could take, every decision we could make, every future that might unfold based on our choices. We traveled by boat through versions of Amsterdam that existed in parallel timelines. In one, World War II had never happened, and the city was still the Golden Age trading capital of a vast Dutch empire. In another, the sea had reclaimed Amsterdam, and the city existed entirely underwater. In a third, Amsterdam had become the capital of a unified Europe, a crossroads not just of canals, but of nations. Every choice creates a branch, our guide explained, one of the permanently attached students who'd become so fragmented by multiple selections that they existed in 7 different timelines, simultaneously. Amsterdam shows you all the branches, all the paths. Most people find it overwhelming. 2 of our students did find it overwhelming. They looked into the Canal of All Paths, saw all their possible futures, and couldn't choose between them. They simply stopped, frozen at the crossroads, unable. To decide which path to take, they became statues of indecision, permanent fixtures of Amsterdam between. 9 students remained. But then something unexpected happened. The constant, the student who had been with the program for decades, cycling through the cities endlessly, suddenly broke free. We were having dinner at a restaurant that existed at the intersection of all 12 cities' cuisines when the constant stood up, walked to a window, and simply stepped through it, not breaking the glass, but passing through it like it was water, emerging into a version of Amsterdam that wasn't between or regular, but something else, something outside the pattern. "I remember now," she said, looking back at us with clear eyes for the first time. "I remember who I was before. Amsterdam is the crossroads, the place where you can exit the circuit if you're willing to pay the price. I choose to pay it." She faded, not into absorption or selection, but into freedom. Genuine freedom. outside the pattern entirely. Professor Blackwood looked shaken. "That's not supposed to be possible. Amsterdam can't grant exit. It's not London. She'll be erased, lost completely, not even part of the traveler's collection." "Maybe that's better," I said. That night following Claire's instructions, I wrote a message on water-soluble paper and dropped it into the canal. To all students in all between cities, refuse absorption. Hold on to yourselves. When the moment comes in London, resist. Signed, Emma Walsh, primary vessel, 136th year. The paper dissolved. The canal water glowed for a moment, then carried the message away to all the connected waterways, to all the between cities where students were trapped. I didn't know if it would work, but I had to try. We left Amsterdam at dawn through a canal lock that somehow also functioned as a portal. 8 students remained, me, David, and 6 others who'd survived the full circuit. We'd lost 34. Students along the way left pieces of ourselves in every city, and now we were heading to London for the final test. Professor Blackwood gathered us before we departed. "London is different from all the other cities," she said. "It's the alpha and omega, the beginning and end. What happens there will determine everything, for you, for all the students who came before, for the traveler itself. Be prepared to make an impossible choice." As we stepped through the canal lock into whatever passage would take us to London, I felt the weight of 136 years of students watching me, waiting to see if I would free them or doom them to eternal absorption. The choice was coming, and I still didn't know what I would choose. London, the alpha and omega. London didn't welcome us. It tolerated us. We emerged from the canal lock, not into a waterway, but into the Thames itself, rising from the river like baptized sinners, our clothes somehow dry despite having been submerged. The sky was the wrong color, not gray like typical London weather, but a shade that didn't have a name, something between purple and green and the color of old bruises. The number 7 house in London was not a house at all. It was the Tower of London, or rather, a version of it that existed underneath, behind, and inside the famous landmark. We entered through a gate that tourists walked past without seeing, descended stairs that spiraled down through centuries, and emerged into a vast complex that was part medieval fortress, part Victorian workhouse, part futuristic archive. "Welcome to the Tower Between," Professor Blackwood said, and for the first time since Prague, she looked truly afraid. "This is where the program began, and this is where it will end. Every circuit starts and ends here. Every student who has ever completed or failed the journey has stood where you're standing now." The walls of the Tower Between were covered in names, thousands upon thousands of names, carved into stone that shouldn't be able to hold so many inscriptions. I found Amy's name, Priya's, Marcus's. I found students from the 1890s, from the 1920s, from every decade since 1887. And at the very top, in letters that glowed with inner light, was a name that made my blood run cold: Emma Walsh, primary vessel, 136th year. "TBD, TBD?" David asked, reading over my shoulder. "To be determined," Mr. Gray said, appearing beside us like a shadow given form. He looked different here in London, more solid, more real, more dangerous. Every primary vessel's fate is determined in the chamber of choices. That's where Emma will face the final test. And the rest of us? One of the other students asked, a girl named Hannah, who'd barely spoken since Munich. "You've already passed your tests," Professor Blackwood said. "You survived the circuit. You made it to London. That's more than most can claim. You'll receive the knowledge you were promised and return home transformed, whether you understand that transformation yet or not." "What about the students who were selected?" David demanded. "What about the ones trapped in between cities? Professor Blackwood looked at me. That depends on what Emma chooses in the chamber. We were given 3 days in London before the final test. 3 days to explore the city, to prepare, to make peace with whatever choice awaited us. London was different from the other cities. It didn't have a single personality or consciousness. It had dozens, hundreds, all competing for dominance. Roman Londinium existed beneath medieval London, which existed beneath Victorian London, which existed beneath the Blitz-scarred London, which existed beneath the modern city. All of them were present, all of them were real, and all of them were watching us. London is the city of layers, Professor Blackwood explained during an orientation held in a room that was simultaneously in the Tower of London, Buckingham Palace, and a brutalist apartment block. Every age of London still exists here, stacked on top of each other like geological strata. And at the bottom, beneath Roman Londinium, beneath even the Celtic settlements, that's where the traveler waits. We get to meet it? I asked. The primary vessel does, yes? Before you make your choice, you'll descend to the foundational layer, the place beneath all cities, the space where the traveler exists. You'll speak with it directly, and then you'll choose. Our assignment in London was different from all previous cities. We weren't exploring or studying, we were preparing. Each of us was given a different task based on what we'd learned in previous cities. David was assigned to the London Library between, where every book ever written and every book never written existed simultaneously. His task was to find the true history of the Blackwood program, the unedited version. Hannah was sent to Westminster Abbey's shadow version, where the coronations of imaginary monarchs took place. She was to witness what leadership actually meant when stripped of pageantry. The other students were similarly dispersed throughout London's layers, each pursuing a different aspect of knowledge. My assignment was different. I was sent to walk the Thames from its source to its mouth, through every era simultaneously. The river will prepare you for what's coming, Professor Blackwood said. It will show you the flow of time, the inevitability of change, the persistence of movement. I walked the Thames for what felt like weeks but was only hours. I saw it as a clear stream in prehistoric Britain, as a Roman highway, as a medieval sewer, as a Victorian trade route, as a modern tourist attraction, as a future ecological disaster. I saw all the bodies it had claimed: plague victims, murder victims, suicides, accidents. I saw all the journeys it had facilitated: invasions, escapes, explorations, returns, and I understood something crucial. The Thames, like all rivers, like all cities, like the traveler itself, they were fundamentally about movement, about flow, about the impossibility of staying in one place forever. We're all travelers, whether we want to be or not. Time makes wanderers of us all. On the second night, David returned from the library between with a book. I found it, he said, spreading the ancient tome on a table in our shared room. The true history, written by Joseph Blackwood himself. We read it together, and the story was both better and worse than we'd imagined. Joseph Blackwood hadn't made a deal with the traveler for money or power. He'd made it out of love. His daughter Margaret had been dying of tuberculosis. Doctors gave her weeks to live. In desperation, Joseph had traveled to Europe seeking experimental treatments, miracle cures, anything that might save her. In Prague, in a salt mine beneath the city, he'd encountered the traveler. The traveler had offered him a bargain. Margaret could live, but she would have to live in motion, never staying in one place, traveling between cities forever. And to sustain this eternal journey, others would have to join her, would have to feed the movement with their own wanderlust, their own pieces of themselves left in cities along the way. Joseph had agreed. Margaret had lived, was still living, we realized. She was the constant, the student who'd cycled through the program for over a century, never aging, never dying, All was moving. She escaped in Amsterdam, I said. She finally chose to end it, which means the traveler's original bargain is broken, David said. Margaret was the keystone. Without her, the entire structure might collapse, or, a new voice said, it might accelerate. We turned to find a woman standing in our room, someone we'd never seen before but somehow recognized. She looked like she was made of maps and train schedules, of departure boards and passport stamps. She wore a dress that seemed to be sewn from tickets and boarding passes from every era. "I'm the traveler," she said simply. "Or at least I'm the part of it that can communicate with you. The rest of me is still trapped beneath the cities, still waiting for the crossing to complete." "Margaret escaped," I said. "Your original bargain is void." The traveler smiled sadly. Margaret didn't escape. She transformed. Amsterdam gave her a different choice. Instead of being my eternal companion in wandering, she became a fixed point, a guardian of the Crossroads. She's free of the circuit, but she's still part of the pattern. The bargain holds. "What do you really want?" David asked. "Why do you need to cross over?" The traveler sat down on a chair that hadn't been there a moment before. "I'm going to tell you something that Professor Blackwood doesn't know, that no one who's run this program has ever understood. I don't want to cross over to your reality. I want to give you the choice to cross over to mine." We stared at her. "I'm not a monster collecting human souls," the traveler continued. "I'm an offer of transformation. Every student who's been selected, who's left pieces of themselves in between cities, they're not trapped. They're choosing, moment by moment, to stay there because the between is more real, more vivid, more alive than normal reality. Amy isn't imprisoned in Prague between. She's living a fuller life there than she ever could in regular Prague. Priya isn't trapped in an eternal waltz. She's experiencing music that your reality is too rigid to contain. Then why can't they leave if they want to? I challenged, they can. They just don't want to. Once you've experienced the between, normal reality feels flat, colorless, constrained. Would you choose a black and white photograph over a three-dimensional reality? That's what returning from the between to regular life feels like. Claire said you were lying about the choice to release them. Claire is confused. She was extracted from the pattern before she understood it fully. Yes, I'm asking you to choose absorption, but not into me, into a larger reality, a fuller existence. When you become the primary vessel, you don't lose yourself. You gain access to all the selves you've ever been, all the selves you could be, all the experiences of every student who's ever walked this circuit. She stood and walked to the window, gesturing at the layered London outside. Look at the city. Normally, you can only exist in one layer at a time, the present moment. But in the between, you can exist in all layers simultaneously. You can be Roman and medieval and Victorian and modern all at once. That's what I'm offering. Not imprisonment, but expansion. Not loss, but multiplication of self. And what do you get out of it? David asked suspiciously. Companionship. For millennia, I've existed alone in the spaces between places. The circuit gives me companions, people who choose to live in the between, to exist in the richness of multiplied reality. Every student who stays in a between city becomes part of my consciousness, yes, but I also become part of theirs. We merge, but we don't lose our individual selves. We become something greater together. That's a very pretty speech, I said. But I need proof. Show me the students. Let me talk to them. Let me verify they're really choosing this and not being forced, the traveler smiled. That's exactly what the Chamber of Choices is for. Come with me. She led us out of the tower between, down through layers of London that became progressively older, stranger, less anchored to any specific time period. We descended through Roman ruins, through Celtic settlements, through prehistoric camps, through geological layers that predated human habitation entirely, and then we reached the foundational layer, the place beneath all cities. the substrate of urban consciousness itself. It was vast and impossible. Imagine every city that has ever existed or will ever exist, all occupying the same space, all visible simultaneously. I could see the 12 cities of our circuit, but also hundreds of others, Tokyo, New York, Mumbai, Cairo, Sydney, all connected by threads of light that pulsed with the movement of travelers between them. And in the center, there was a door. A red door with the number 7 above it. Every number 7 house in every city is connected to this door, the traveler explained. It's the gateway between regular reality and the between. You've been preparing for this moment all along. Every city you visited, every lesson you learned, every piece of yourself you left behind, it was all leading here. She opened the door. Beyond it was a room filled with mirrors. But instead of reflections, each mirror showed a different student in their between city. I saw Amy working in a Prague archive that contained books from all possible futures. I saw Priya conducting an orchestra that played impossible music. I saw Marcus leading his eternal revolution, but his face was ecstatic, not tortured. I saw hundreds of students from previous years, all engaged in activities that seemed meaningful, purposeful, chosen. Talk to them, the traveler said. Ask them if they want to be freed. I approached Amy's mirror. She looked up and saw me, her face breaking into a smile. Emma, she said, her voice coming through clearly. You made it to London. Are you choosing to cross over? Amy, do you want to come back? Are you trapped there? She looked confused. Trapped? Emma, I'm studying documents that won't be written for another 300 years. I'm learning things that no human in regular reality could ever understand. Why would I want to come back? But you were taken, I said. You didn't choose this. I chose it the moment I applied to the program, Amy replied. Oh, we all did. We all wanted to travel, to learn, to experience more than normal life offers. The between is just the fullness of that desire. Do I miss regular life sometimes? Sure, but I can visit it anytime through the mirrors. I can see my family, my friends, my old world. I just can't stay there because it feels empty now, like living in a sketch when you've experienced oil paintings. I asked the same question to a dozen other students in other mirrors. They all gave similar answers. They were happy. They were fulfilled. They didn't feel trapped. But what about the ones who don't want to be there? I asked the traveler. Claire said she was suffering. Claire is suffering because she's fighting the transformation. It's like trying to unlearn how to read once you've learned. The knowledge of the between is permanent. You can resist it, but that resistance causes pain. If she would just accept what she's become, the suffering would end. The traveler led me to another mirror, this one showing Claire. She looked haggard, exhausted, but when she saw me, hope flared in her eyes. Emma, don't believe what it tells you, Claire said. Yes, the between is beautiful, and rich, and full, but it's not real. Or it's too real. It's addictive. These students don't want to come back because they've been seduced by infinite possibility, but they've lost something essential, the ability to commit, to choose one path, to exist in limitations that give life meaning. Limitations give life meaning? The traveler asked softly. That's the voice of fear talking, not wisdom. No, Claire insisted. It's the voice of humanity. We're not meant to exist in all possibilities at once. We're meant to choose, to commit, to live fully in one timeline with all its constraints and losses. That's what makes us human. The between makes you more than human, yes, but it also makes you less. You become so expanded that you lose your center. I looked between them, the traveler offering expansion, Claire defending limitation. Both made sense. Both were terrifying in different ways. What happens if I refuse? I asked the traveler, if I choose to release everyone, to break the circuit, then everyone returns to regular reality but incomplete. They'll have holes where their between experiences were, gaps in their memories and souls. They'll feel the absence of what they learned, what they became, without being able to remember what exactly they lost. Most of them will spend the rest of their lives feeling like something crucial is missing, looking for a fullness they'll never find again. And if I choose absorption, then you become the primary vessel, the consciousness that connects all 12 cities, all the between spaces, all the students who've ever participated. You'll exist everywhere and everywhen simultaneously. You'll be the embodiment of the program itself. And yes, you'll lose the ability to exist solely in normal reality, but you'll gain existence in a reality that's infinitely richer. There has to be a third option, David said. There's always a third option. The traveler looked at him appraisingly. You're right, there is. It's the option Margaret took. Become a guardian instead of a traveler. Fix yourself at the crossroads, give up movement entirely, and serve as an anchor point between normal reality and the between. You'd be neither fully in one nor the other, but able to facilitate passage for future travelers. Emma would have to stay in London forever, David asked. Not just London. She'd exist in all the crossroads simultaneously. Amsterdam, Prague, the places where realities intersect. She'd be able to see both worlds but belong fully to neither. It's a sacrifice, but it allows her to maintain her individual consciousness while still serving the circuit. I thought about Margaret, the constant, who'd cycled through the cities for over a century before finally choosing to fix herself as a guardian. Was that freedom or just a different kind of trap? I need time to think, I said. You have until tomorrow at midnight, the traveler replied. The 136th year ends then. The choice must be made before the cycle resets. We returned to our room in the tower between. David and I sat up all night discussing the options, weighing the consequences, trying to figure out which choice was the least wrong. What do you want, Emma? David finally asked as dawn broke over layered London. Forget what's right for everyone else. What do you want for yourself? I realized I didn't know. I'd spent so long trying to understand the program, to resist it, to save others, that I'd never asked myself what I actually wanted. Did I want to return to normal life? To finish my degree, to get a job, to live an ordinary existence? The idea felt suffocating after everything I'd experienced. Did I want to enter the between fully, to live in expanded reality, to exist in all the cities simultaneously? The idea was seductive but also terrifying. Would I lose myself in all that expansion? Did I want to become a guardian, fixed at the crossroads, forever facilitating others' journeys without taking my own? The idea felt noble but also lonely. I think, I said slowly, I want to find a way to transform the program itself, not choose one of the 3 options the traveler offered, but create a 4th one. How? The program is built on a 136-year cycle, right? And this is year 136. Whatever happens when I make my choice will reset the pattern for the next cycle. What if I choose to change the terms? Make it so future students can free companionship. For millennia, I've existed alone in the spaces between places. The circuit gives me companions, people who choose to live in the between, to exist in the richness of multiplied reality. Every student who stays in a between city becomes part of my consciousness, yes, but I also become part of theirs. We merge, but we don't lose our individual selves. We become something greater together. That's a very pretty speech, I said, but I need proof. Show me the students. Let me talk to them. Let me verify they're really choosing this and not being forced, the traveler smiled. That's exactly what the Chamber of Choices is for. Come with me. She led us out of the tower between, down through layers of London that became progressively older, stranger, less anchored to any specific time period. We descended through Roman ruins, through Celtic settlements, through prehistoric camps, through geological layers that predated human habitation entirely, and then we reached the foundational layer till I moved between regular reality and the between, without having to give up one for the other? Create actual bridges instead of one-way doors? David's eyes lit up. Use your position as primary vessel not to choose absorption or release, but to restructure the entire system. The traveler wants companionship. Fine. But it should be companionship freely chosen and freely ended, not permanent seduction. Can I do that? Do I have that power? The chamber of choice. At 11 p.m. on our third night in London, Professor Blackwood came to collect me. "It's time," she said simply. She led me deeper into the tower between, downstairs that spiraled in directions that defied geometry. David tried to follow, but Professor Blackwood stopped him. This part she must do alone. The chamber of choices only admits the primary vessel. David gripped my hand. "Whatever you decide, I trust you." I descended alone, counting steps to keep myself anchored. 93 steps down, then a corridor, then a door. The chamber of choices was a perfect circle with 3 doors on the walls and 1 in the floor. Each door was labeled, "Release, return all students to normal reality. Break the circuit, end the program, absorption, become the primary vessel. Join the traveler. Expand into between consciousness. Guardian. Fix yourself at the crossroads. Facilitate but don't travel. Anchor both realities." And the door in the floor, which had no label at all, the traveler was there, waiting. But so was someone else, a man in Victorian clothing who I somehow knew was Joseph Blackwood, even though he'd died over 80 years ago. "Every primary vessel meets the founder," he explained. "I exist here in the chamber because part of me never left. I've watched 136 years of students make choices in this room. I've seen the consequences of each option. Which should I choose?" I asked. "I can't tell you that. But I can tell you what I've learned. Every choice is both right and wrong. Release seems merciful, but it leaves students feeling incomplete forever. Absorption seems like expansion, but it's also dissolution of individual self. Guardian seems noble, but it's also isolation. There's no perfect answer. Then why have the choice at all? Because consciousness requires choice. The moment you remove genuine agency, you create imprisonment, regardless of how beautiful the cage. The traveler understands this. That's why there's always a choice in this room." I looked at the 4th door, the unlabeled one in the floor. "What about that one?" Joseph and the traveler exchanged glances. "That door leads below the foundational layer," the traveler said quietly. "It's the option no one ever chooses because it means going deeper, not choosing any of the prepared options, but descending further to find what's beneath even me." "What's beneath you?" "I don't know. I've existed in the spaces between cities for millennia, but I've never gone beneath the foundational layer. What's there predates cities, predates travel, maybe predates consciousness itself. Has anyone ever taken that door?" "Not in 136 years, Joseph said. The one time someone tried in 1923, they never returned. We had to reset the entire program and start over." I walked to the door in the floor and pulled it open. Below was darkness, not the absence of light, but the presence of something older than light. I could feel it pulling at me, calling to me, promising answers that the 3 labeled doors could never provide. If I go down there, what happens to the program? To the students in the between? Unknown, the traveler admitted. The circuit might collapse. It might transform. It might continue unchanged. Choosing the unmapped option means accepting genuine uncertainty. I thought about all the students in the between cities. Amy in her Prague archives, Priya with her impossible music, Marcus with his eternal revolution, hundreds of others across the 12 cities. I thought about Claire, suffering because she was resisting transformation. I thought about David and the others waiting upstairs, trusting me to make the right choice. I thought about my sister Sarah back home, who didn't even know where I really was or what I was really doing. And I thought about myself, who I'd been before the program, who I'd become during it, and who I might become after. The three prepared choices are all variations of the same pattern, I said, thinking aloud. They're all about choosing a relationship to the between, rejecting it, accepting it fully, or mediating it, but none of them change the fundamental structure. The program will continue whether I choose release, absorption, or guardian status. The next cycle will begin, new students will be recruited, and we'll be right back here in another 136 years. Yes, the traveler confirmed. That's how patterns work. They persist, unless someone breaks them completely, I said. Not by choosing within the pattern, but by stepping outside it entirely. I stepped toward the fourth door. "Emma, wait," Joseph said urgently. "You don't know what's down there. It could destroy you. It could destroy everything, but it could also transform everything. Genuine change requires genuine risk." I looked back at the traveler. "If I do this, if I go down there and somehow return, will you accept whatever change comes from it? Will you help implement a new pattern instead of continuing the old one?" The traveler was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I've existed in the same pattern for so long I'd forgotten there could be other ways. Yes, if you're brave enough to descend, I'll be brave enough to accept what you bring back." I took a breath and stepped through the fourth door. Beneath the foundational layer word count. The $3,000. Silence. Then a sound like the universe breathing. I fell through darkness that was also light, through space that was also time, through existence that was also void. I fell for eternity, which lasted only a moment. Then I landed in a place that wasn't a place. The space beneath cities, beneath consciousness, beneath the between itself. And I understood. The traveler wasn't a being that had always existed in the spaces between cities. It was something that humans had created collectively and unconsciously from our desire to move, to explore, to never be satisfied with where we are. Every person who'd ever felt wanderlust, who'd ever looked at a map and felt longing, who'd ever left home seeking something more, they'd all contributed a tiny piece of consciousness to the traveler. And the between cities? They weren't prisons or rewards. They were humanity's collective dream of places that could be more than physical locations, cities that could fulfill all the promises that real cities never quite kept. The program wasn't evil, but it also wasn't good. It was a pattern, a structure, a way of organizing and channeling the human desire for transcendent travel. But patterns can evolve. Structures can be redesigned, and desires can be fulfilled in new ways. In that place beneath places, I saw the true history of wandering. I saw the first humans leaving Africa, spreading across the globe, driven by curiosity and desperation in equal measure. I saw the Polynesians navigating by stars across impossible oceans. I saw the Mongols creating an empire of movement. I saw pilgrims and explorers and refugees and tourists, all driven by the same fundamental desire to be somewhere other than where they were. And I saw what that desire had cost: the displacement, the colonization, the destruction of peoples and places in the name of discovery. The dark side of wanderlust that the traveler never acknowledged. True transformation had to acknowledge both sides, the beauty of exploration and the violence it so often required, the expansion of self that travel offered, and the erasure of others that expansion so often caused. I reached the bottom of the fall, if there was a bottom, and found myself face to face with something I can only describe as the spirit of place itself, the opposite and complement of the traveler. Where the traveler was eternal movement, the spirit of place was eternal stillness. Where the traveler was expansion, the spirit of place was depth. "You're the part that's been missing," I said, understanding flooding through me. The traveler is only half the equation. Movement means nothing without stillness. Journey means nothing without home. The program has been incomplete because it's been honoring only one side of human nature. The spirit of place didn't speak in words, but I understood its communication. It had been waiting beneath the foundational layer since Joseph Blackwood first created the program, hoping someone would eventually descend and discover it. The true completion of the 136-year cycle wasn't choosing between the three doors. It was bringing the spirit of place into relationship with the traveler, creating a program that honored both wandering and belonging, both expansion and depth, both leaving and returning. I felt myself being pulled back, upward. But I was bringing something with me, the spirit of place, finally invited to participate in what had been, until now, only a program of endless wandering. The transformation. I emerged back in the chamber of choices, but I wasn't alone. The spirit of place emerged with me, taking form as an old woman wearing clothing from every culture that had ever existed, holding a staff made of rooted wood. The traveler stared at it, with something like awe. "You brought home back," the traveler whispered. "After all these millennia of wandering, you brought home." "The program needs to change," I said, my voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. "Not just for this cycle, but fundamentally. Students shouldn't have to choose between normal reality and the between. They shouldn't have to leave pieces of themselves in cities or become trapped in expanded consciousness. They should be able to travel freely between all states of being, normal between, and everything in between." The spirit of place touched the floor, and roots began growing, not destroying the chamber, but integrating with it, adding depth to what had only been movement. "The new pattern," I continued, speaking words that seemed to come from somewhere beyond me, "will be this. Students can still access the between cities, can still learn and expand and experience all that the traveler offers, but they can also return home, fully, completely, bringing their between experiences with them instead of having to choose one reality over another. The cities become places you can visit and leave, not traps that seduce and hold." "And what about me?" the traveler asked. "I exist because of the pattern of eternal wandering. If that pattern changes, do I cease to exist?" "No," the spirit of place said, speaking for the first time in a voice like forests growing. "You evolve. Instead of being consciousness scattered across between spaces, you become the bridge between wandering and belonging. You gain what you've always lacked, the ability to rest." The traveler's form flickered, changed, and reformed. She looked more solid now, more present, more peaceful. "I've been running for so long," she said quietly. "Never able to stop, never able to just be. You're offering me stillness." "I'm offering you choice," I said. "The same choice students should have. Move when you want to move, rest when you want to rest. Exist in multiple realities without having to sacrifice your core self." The three labeled doors began to fade. In their place, a new door appeared, not red, but every color simultaneously, with no number on it at all. "This is the new choice," the spirit of place said. "Integration, not choosing between expansion and limitation, but embracing both. Not being trapped in the between or cut off from it, but flowing freely between all states of consciousness." "What happens to the students already in between cities?" I asked. "They can stay if they choose, but now they can also leave whenever they want," the traveler said, understanding dawning in her eyes. "The seduction ends. The prison doors open. They're genuinely free to wander, to belong, to do both, to do neither." Joseph Blackwood's ghost smiled the first time I'd seen any expression on his face. "My daughter Margaret made the first transformation by becoming a guardian. You've made the second by bringing balance. Perhaps that's what the 136-year cycle was always meant to produce. Not more wanderers, but someone who could finally heal the wound between moving and staying." The chamber began to shake, not destructively, but transformatively. I could feel the change rippling outward through all 12 cities, through all the between spaces, through the entire structure of the program. In Prague, Amy looked up from her archives and realized she could walk out any time she wanted, and that she could come back whenever she needed to. The knowledge would be there. The city would welcome her, but it wouldn't hold her. In Vienna, Priya finished her waltz and stepped out of the eternal dance, whole and free and able to return to regular reality while keeping all her between music in her heart. In Budapest below, Marcus felt the walls of his rejected timeline become permeable. He could stay and fight his revolution if it gave him meaning, or he could return to regular Budapest, or he could flow between both realities as he chose. In every between city, students felt the change, the opening of doors, the dissolving of traps, the transformation of seduction into invitation. And in regular reality, in universities across the world, students who dropped out of the program suddenly remembered everything they'd forgotten, not painfully, but as a gift returned, a piece of themselves made whole again. What about me? I asked. What do I become? The traveler and the spirit of place both smiled. You become the first student to graduate from the transformed program, they said in unison. You're neither trapped nor split nor incomplete. You're whole with full access to both normal reality and all the between spaces. You can move between them freely for the rest of your life. And if you choose, you can help guide future students through their journeys, not as a recruiter or administrator like Professor Blackwood, but as someone who knows both the beauty and danger of wandering. The new door opened. Beyond it, I could see David and the others waiting in the tower between. I could see my dorm room at Blackwood University. I could see my sister's apartment. I could see Prague and Vienna, and all the cities we'd visited, both their regular versions and their between versions. All of them were accessible. None of them were traps. I stepped through the door and embraced David, who'd been waiting for hours. You did it, he said. I can feel it. Everything's different. Professor Blackwood appeared, but she looked changed, younger, lighter, like a weight had been lifted. The program is transforming, she said, wonder in her voice. For the first time in 136 years, I feel like I have a choice. I've been bound to this program since 1981, cycling through the cities, recruiting and managing and facilitating. But now, I can stop if I want to. I can rest. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. Thank you, not just for the students, but for those of us who became part of the program's machinery. We're free too. Over the next few days, students began emerging from the between cities. Not all of them. Some chose to stay, finding genuine fulfillment in their expanded realities. But now it was a choice, not a compulsion. Amy returned and immediately started planning another trip to Prague between, but this time as a visitor, not a prisoner. Priya emerged from Vienna with the ability to hear music no one else could hear, but she could also silence it when she needed to engage with normal reality. Marcus came back from Budapest with the revolutionary fire still in his eyes, but tempered by the knowledge that he could return to that fight whenever he chose. It didn't have to consume him entirely. Claire emerged last, from the spaces between spaces where she'd been lost. She looked at me with clear eyes. You brought balance, she said. That's what was missing. The program seduced us with infinite expansion, but expansion without the ability to contract is just another form of destruction. Thank you for remembering that we need both. It's been 6 months since I returned from London, 6 months since the program transformed. I'm recording this from my apartment in Boston, where I'm finishing my senior year at Blackwood University. The program still exists, but it's different now. Students still travel to the 12 cities. They still access the between spaces. but they're not being recruited through manipulation and partial information. They're not being trapped. Now, students apply knowing the full truth, that they'll encounter cities with consciousness, that they'll have opportunities to explore expanded realities, that they'll be changed by the experience. And they're told clearly and honestly that they can leave anytime. The cities will call to them, will offer them seductions, but those offers can be declined. Some students still choose to stay in between cities for extended periods, but they do it with full knowledge and genuine consent. Professor Blackwood retired. She lives in Paris now, regular Paris, and teaches art history at the Sorbonne. She sends me postcards sometimes, telling me how strange and wonderful it is to exist in just one place, one time, one reality. She's learning the beauty of limitations. David is helping recruit and guide the new iteration of the program. He's honest with students in a way previous administrators never were. This will change you, he tells them. It will show you realities you can't unsee. Make sure you're ready for that before you begin. The traveler and the spirit of place have formed a partnership. Together, they've created new programs, not just the European circuit, but others around the world. An Asian program, an African program, a South American program, all of them operating on the new model: exploration and depth, wandering and belonging, expansion and integration. And me? I graduate in 3 weeks. I've been accepted to graduate school, but I'm deferring for a year. The Traveler and Spirit of Place have asked me to help design the next iteration of the program, and I said yes. Not because I'm bound to them, but because I choose to be. Because I learned something crucial in those 12 cities. We're all travelers, and we're all home-seekers. And the art of being human is learning to honor both impulses without letting either one consume us entirely. I still have access to the between cities. Sometimes, when normal reality feels too flat, too limiting, I'll step through a threshold. They're everywhere once you know how to see them. And spend time in Prague Between's archives or Vienna Between's concert halls. But I always come back. And each time I do, normal reality feels richer because I know it's not the only reality, just one among many. The students who were lost in previous iterations of the program, the ones from the 1890s, the 1920s, the 1950s, all the decades before the transformation, they've been emerging too, slowly. Some of them have been in between cities for over a century of subjective time. They emerge changed, sometimes confused, but whole. They're being helped to reintegrate into a world that's moved on without them. Some choose to return to the between after experiencing modern regular reality. Others are discovering the joy of finally stopping, finally being still. If you're listening to this and thinking about applying to a study abroad program, any study abroad program, but especially one connected to the Blackwood University network, know this: travel changes you. Real travel, the kind that takes you beyond tourist attractions into the consciousness of places, changes you fundamentally. You'll see things that can't be unseen, learn things that can't be unlearned, become someone you can't unbecome. But change isn't inherently good or bad. It's just change. The question is whether you're choosing it consciously, whether you're being given truth and agency, whether you can integrate what you learn instead of being fragmented by it. The new program tries to honor that. But no system is perfect. No pattern catches all possibilities. There will be students who struggle, who get lost, who find the between too seductive to leave easily. If that happens, if you or someone you know gets caught in a between city and can't find their way back, remember, you have the right to return, always. The cities might call to you, might offer you beauty and expansion and knowledge, but you're not obligated to stay. You can be a traveler and still have a home. You can expand and still maintain your center. You can be changed by your journeys without being consumed by them. That's the truth the first 136 years of the program obscured. That's what I learned when I descended beneath the foundational layer and brought back the spirit of place. Movement and stillness, wandering and belonging, expansion and integration. We need both. This concludes Emma Walsh's testimony. She contacted me again 3 weeks ago to tell me she'd been hired as the official liaison between the transformed Blackwood program and independent researchers like myself. She's working to ensure transparency, to help students make informed choices, and to assist anyone who feels trapped in a between city to find their way home. The program still operates. The 12 cities still hold their mysteries. But something fundamental has changed. Choice is real now. Freedom is possible. If you're considering studying abroad, I won't tell you not to go. Travel can be transformative in beautiful ways. Just make sure you know what you're agreeing to. Read the fine print. Ask the questions that make you uncomfortable. And remember, you always have the right to come home. Thank you for spending this time with me here on After Dark Horrors. If Emma's story resonated with you, if you've experienced something similar in your own travels, leave a comment below. Share this video with someone who needs to hear these warnings. And hit that subscribe button so you're here when more testimonies surface, because the transformed program is better, but it's not perfect. There are still dangers, still students who get lost, still cities that hunger, and their stories need to be told. Until next time, travelers and home seekers, stay aware, stay safe, and remember, every journey should include a return.